The courtroom buzzed with an electric intensity. Reporters shuffled papers and whispered in hushed tones, their cameras poised to capture every moment of what promised to be the trial of the century. Outside, the streets were filled with spectators, some curious, some skeptical, all eager to witness the drama unfold. Inside, the air was thick with tension, and everyone was on edge. At the center of it all, standing tall and resolute, was none other than Elon Musk, the billionaire visionary, and CEO of SpaceX and Tesla. Musk was no stranger to the spotlight. He had revolutionized industries, taken humanity to space, and reshaped the electric car market. But today, his most significant challenge wasn't a technical breakthrough or a bold new idea, it was a battle in a courtroom, one that could threaten everything he had built. Musk's usual confident demeanor was nowhere to be seen. His sharp, calculating eyes darted around the courtroom, scanning the sea of people. His team of lawyers, one of the best in the business, huddled at the defense table, reviewing notes and whispering strategy. They were a well-oiled machine, but even they couldn't mask the underlying unease that lingered in the air. The courtroom doors slammed shut, signaling the start of the trial. The judge, a no-nonsense figure with a reputation for tough rulings, entered, and the room fell into a hushed silence. All eyes were on him, waiting for the gavel to fall. But it wasn't the judge that held everyone's attention today. It was Elon Musk. The case against him was serious, allegations of market manipulation, stock fraud, and deceptive practices. Specifically, Musk was accused of tweeting misleading information that inflated the price of Tesla's stock, causing financial harm to investors and creating an unfair advantage for himself. The SEC had already slapped Musk with a hefty fine and even forced him to step down as Tesla's chairman, but this trial was far more dangerous, it was personal, and the stakes were higher than ever before. Musk's legal team had prepared for months. They knew this would be a battle of wits and strategy, and they were ready to fight tooth and nail. But even they couldn't ignore the fact that the case against Musk was strong. The plaintiffs had mountains of evidence, tweets, financial records, and testimony from angry investors. On paper, it looked like a slam dunk. Musk, the maverick genius who had disrupted industries, was now on trial for his very freedom. As the trial began, the tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch. The prosecution opened with a bombshell, presenting Musk's now infamous tweets as evidence of his blatant disregard for the truth and his disregard for the impact his words had on the stock market. The lead prosecutor, a seasoned lawyer with a sharp tongue, wasted no time in painting Musk as a reckless billionaire who used his platform to manipulate the market for his personal gain. Musk sat motionless, his expression unreadable. His legal team, led by his top attorney, Jessica Grant, was ready to counter the prosecution's claims. But for the first time in a long while, even they had to acknowledge the strength of the opposition. Your Honor, the prosecutor continued, the defendant, Elon Musk, knowingly tweeted false and misleading information that resulted in the manipulation of stock prices, leading to significant financial losses for investors. The evidence is clear, and the damages are undeniable. Musk's actions were not just irresponsible, they were criminal. Musk's legal team immediately objected, but the judge overruled them, allowing the prosecution to proceed with their case. The tension continued to rise as the prosecution laid out its case in meticulous detail, leaving no stone unturned. Every tweet Musk had ever sent seemed to be scrutinized, analyzed, and presented as a deliberate effort to deceive the public and manipulate the stock market. The courtroom was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of papers and the occasional murmur from the audience. Musk's lawyers knew they had to act fast. They had to do something dramatic, something unexpected, if they were going to stand a chance. They couldn't afford to lose. Not now, not after everything he had built. As the prosecution wrapped up its opening statements, Musk's legal team sprang into action. Jessica Grant stood up, her voice calm but commanding as she addressed the court. Your Honor, esteemed members of the jury, we are here today to show that Elon Musk is not the villain the prosecution has painted him to be. We will demonstrate that his actions were not reckless, they were visionary. This trial is not about a man who broke the law, it is about a man who changed the world. And in doing so, he made mistakes, yes. But those mistakes do not deserve the punishment they seek. It was a powerful statement, but would it be enough? The jury seemed captivated, hanging on every word. Musk sat silently, his face a mask of concentration. He was a man of action, not words, but today, words would be his greatest weapon. As the first day of the trial came to a close, Musk left the courtroom in a whirlwind of questions, whispers, and flashing cameras. Outside, the reporters were relentless. Elon Musk gets destroyed in court, one headline blared. Will the Tesla CEO survive the trial of the century? Another questioned. But Musk, ever the enigma, didn't flinch. He didn't say a word to the press, his eyes focused only on the long road ahead. This was just the beginning. He knew the battle would be tough, but if anyone could turn the tide, it was him. And with that thought, Musk silently vowed to use everything in his power to come out on top. But how? What could he do to fight back when the odds were stacked so high against him? Before he could even begin to formulate a plan, one of his closest allies, a brilliant attorney named David Chang, pulled him aside. "We need to think outside the box, Elon," David said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've got a long fight ahead. But we can't win this on the defense alone. It's time to make a move they won't see coming." Musk's eyes narrowed, a glint of determination flashing across his face. "I'm listening," he said. David leaned in closer. "We flip the script. We make them question everything they thought they knew about this case. It's not just about the law, it's about strategy, perception, and timing. We take control of the narrative." For the first time in days, Musk allowed himself a small, confident smile. "Let's make them regret ever underestimating me." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk wasn't born into the wealth and fame that many people assumed came with being one of the most influential billionaires of the 21st century. His story started long before Tesla, SpaceX, or Twitter, and it wasn't always paved with the glitter of success. His journey was shaped by the kind of challenges that few people could ever imagine, challenges that formed the foundation of the man who would later stand on the precipice of a courtroom battle, with everything he had worked for hanging in the balance. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, on June 28, 1971, Elon Reeve Musk was the son of a Canadian mother, May Musk, a model and dietitian, and a South African father, Errol Musk, a wealthy electromechanical engineer. Elon's childhood was far from ordinary. His parents' marriage was strained, and they eventually divorced when Elon was just 10 years old. While his father's wealth gave Elon a degree of comfort growing up, it was his mother's determination and independence that had the most profound effect on him. May was a role model for Elon in many ways. Her resilience and work ethic instilled in him the belief that success wasn't just about talent, it was about the relentless pursuit of one's goals, no matter how difficult or distant they might seem. From a young age, Elon showed signs of the brilliance that would later make him famous. At age 10, he taught himself computer programming by reading books and learning how to code. By 12, he had sold his first video game, Blaster, for $500. It wasn't just that he was smart, it was the drive he had to constantly push himself beyond what was expected of him. Musk's passion for technology and innovation became his lifeline in a world where he didn't always fit in. At school, he was bullied, often feeling isolated. But instead of letting that define him, he threw himself into his studies and spent hours lost in the pages of books on science, engineering, and physics. It was these formative years that shaped his insatiable curiosity and hunger for understanding the world around him. When Elon moved to Canada at age 17 to attend Queen's University, he wasn't just looking for a fresh start, he was searching for his purpose. He soon transferred to the University of Pennsylvania in the U.S., where he earned degrees in both economics and physics. But his academic achievements were only a stepping stone to what was to come. Musk wasn't interested in being just another graduate, he wanted to change the world. The problem was, his vision wasn't always shared by those around him. In 1995, Elon dropped out of Stanford University after just 2 days, choosing instead to pursue what he believed would be his future, technology in business. His first venture, Zip2, a city guide software company, was born out of the early days of the Internet. Musk's vision was clear. He saw the future of digital media as being something far beyond just static content. It was going to be dynamic, interactive, and driven by the power of technology. He wasn't interested in traditional business models, he wanted to create something revolutionary. Zip2 was eventually sold to Compaq for nearly $300 million, and Elon Musk became a millionaire at the age of 27. But instead of basking in the success of his first venture, he used his newfound wealth to fund his next big idea, X.com, a financial services company that would later evolve into PayPal. Again, Musk wasn't content to settle for mediocrity, he wanted to build something that would fundamentally change how people handled money and conduct financial transactions. The road to success wasn't smooth, however. Musk was ousted from X.com after a series of internal conflicts, but instead of seeing it as a failure, he used the experience to learn valuable lessons about leadership, perseverance, and the importance of surrounding himself with people who shared his vision. PayPal was ultimately sold to eBay for $1.5 billion, and Musk's wealth skyrocketed. But this wasn't the end of his journey, it was only the beginning. With his newfound fortune, Musk set his sights on something far grander, space exploration. SpaceX, founded in 2002, was Musk's dream come true. He envisioned a future where humanity could become a multiplanetary species, with Mars as the next frontier. His goal wasn't just to send people to space, it was to make space travel affordable, sustainable, and accessible to everyone. It was a vision that was met with skepticism, especially given the state of space travel at the time. But Musk's determination, combined with his deep understanding of physics and engineering, allowed him to defy expectations. SpaceX became the first private company to send a spacecraft to the International Space Station, and its reusable rocket technology revolutionized the space industry. Tesla, founded in 2004, was another one of Musk's bold moves. The electric car industry was still in its infancy, and Musk faced enormous pressure from investors and critics alike. But once again, his relentless vision for the future drove him to push boundaries. He wasn't just trying to build an electric car company, he was trying to create a new kind of car, one that could compete with the best and disrupt the entire automotive industry. With the launch of the Model S, Tesla proved that electric cars didn't have to be slow, inefficient, or unattractive. They could be powerful, stylish, and capable of changing the way we thought about transportation. But for all of his triumphs, Musk's life has never been without controversy. His management style, often described as demanding and unyielding, has earned him both loyal supporters and vocal critics. His public persona, part genius, part showman, has made him a polarizing figure. Musk's tweets, in particular, have often sparked outrage, especially when it comes to his unfiltered remarks about the stock market, Tesla's financial outlook, and even the broader economy. In many ways, his public statements have been as much a part of his brand as his companies themselves. This very nature, his refusal to conform to traditional norms, his confidence in pushing the boundaries of possibility, was what had gotten him into trouble in the first place. And now, it was about to come back to haunt him in a way that no one could have predicted. As Musk sat in the courtroom, staring ahead at the judge, the jury, and his accusers, his mind wasn't just focused on the case at hand. He was thinking about everything that had led him here, the triumphs, the setbacks, the lessons learned along the way. And though the weight of the trial hung heavy on his shoulders, he knew that this was just another challenge to overcome, just another obstacle in a long line of challenges that had defined his career. Elon Musk wasn't just a businessman. He was a man who had faced the odds time and time again, and come out on top. But this time, the odds were steeper than ever before. And he had no intention of losing. The second day of the trial was upon them, and the courtroom had taken on an almost ominous aura. The air was thick with anticipation. Outside, the crowds had only grown larger, their murmurs growing louder with each passing hour. They were hungry for drama, eager to witness the downfall or redemption of one of the most influential figures in modern history. Elon Musk's legal team was busy preparing for the next phase of the trial. Jessica Grant, Musk's lead attorney, paced the room with an intensity that mirrored the situation at hand. Her mind raced with strategy, but there was a gnawing concern deep down. This wasn't just a trial, it was a public spectacle. And that meant every move had to be calculated with precision. If they didn't act fast and make a statement, they could lose the upper hand. David Chang, the brilliant strategist on Musk's team, was already formulating the next phase of their attack. He had watched the prosecution's opening statement closely and knew that while they had a strong case, they lacked something critical: proof of intent. The law didn't care about public opinion or the perception of Musk as a reckless billionaire. It cared about facts. And the facts, David believed, were in their favor. They needed to prove that Musk's tweets, though controversial, didn't break any laws. "Let's turn their strongest evidence into our weakest link," David said, pacing back and forth. "We'll show them that the tweets weren't misleading, they were visionary. That's how we'll frame this." Jessica nodded, a sense of resolve returning to her. She had always admired David's ability to turn the tables in high-stakes cases, and this was no different. They had to make it clear to the jury that this wasn't about Musk being a reckless billionaire, it was about him being a visionary misunderstood by the masses, someone whose passion for innovation sometimes blurred the lines of communication. Meanwhile, Musk sat quietly in the courtroom, his eyes fixed on the proceedings. As always, his thoughts were a whirlwind of ideas and possibilities. He had dealt with far worse before: corporate sabotage, personal attacks, and public ridicule. But this was different. The courtroom was a battleground of its own, and Musk needed to adapt. As the trial resumed, the prosecution wasted no time in pressing its advantage. The lead prosecutor, a sharp and well-spoken attorney named Sarah Jennings, stepped up to the podium. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here because Elon Musk chose to disregard the law. He used his position as CEO of one of the largest companies in the world to manipulate the stock market for his own benefit. His tweets were no simple mistake, they were part of a calculated campaign to mislead investors, boost his company's stock price, and profit from it." She held up a large screen, displaying one of Musk's infamous tweets from a few years ago. The tweet read, "Tesla stock price is too high IMO." It was simple, seemingly offhand, yet it had sent shockwaves through the market, causing Tesla's stock to plummet for a short period. For the prosecution, this tweet was the smoking gun, the moment that everything spiraled out of control. Jennings turned to the jury, her eyes narrowed. "This is the man who risks billions on a whim, who uses his Twitter account to influence the stock market, and who ultimately doesn't pay the price for his actions." Investors were left holding the bag while Musk reaped the benefits. Musk's legal team remained stoic as Jennings continued her argument. David Chang exchanged a brief glance with Jessica, signaling that it was time for them to make their move. They needed to show that this wasn't a simple case of market manipulation, it was something far more complicated. Jessica stood up, walking with purpose toward the center of the courtroom. Her voice was calm, measured, but every word carried the weight of years of experience. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "the prosecution would like you to believe that Elon Musk's tweet was a deliberate act of market manipulation. But what they fail to tell you is that Musk's tweet wasn't about stock prices. It was a statement about his belief in the future of Tesla. You see, what they don't understand, what they want to twist into a negative, is that Musk's vision has always been about more than just the bottom line. It's about disrupting industries, changing the world for the better. And sometimes, in the pursuit of that vision, the line between what's a simple statement and what's a financial forecast can get blurry." Musk sat up straighter, his gaze never leaving the courtroom. He knew Jessica was playing the long game. She was shifting the narrative, challenging the very assumptions that the prosecution was trying to build their case on. The key was to paint Musk not as a reckless businessman, but as someone whose passion for innovation and progress sometimes led him to act impulsively, but never with the intention of harming others. Jessica continued, Elon Musk's words may have been bold, but they were never meant to deceive anyone. They were a reflection of his belief in Tesla's growth potential, a belief he has never wavered from. If you look at the history of his companies, SpaceX, Tesla, you will see a consistent track record of innovation and success. But more importantly, you will see a man who has always acted in the best interests of his employees, investors, and the future of the industries he's trying to change. As Jessica spoke, Musk's mind briefly wandered. It was true that his impulsive nature had gotten him into trouble in the past. He had made decisions that some people considered reckless, even dangerous. But it was also true that his vision had pushed humanity further than most people ever thought possible. Tesla had revolutionized electric cars. SpaceX had made space travel a reality for private companies. His ventures had redefined what was possible in the worlds of transportation, energy, and technology. And now, he was fighting for his future. But he was used to fighting. For every step he had taken, there had been opposition, criticism, and doubt. This was just another challenge, another battle in the never-ending journey to change the world. The defense had made their point. Now, it was time for the prosecution to respond. Sarah Jennings took the floor once more, ready to continue the battle. Your Honor, this is not a case of a visionary misjudging the market. This is a case of a man who willfully misled investors to line his own pockets. His tweets were no accident. They were deliberate actions to influence stock prices, and the evidence is clear. The back and forth between the two sides was far from over, but as the day's session wrapped up, Musk felt the weight of the trial bear down on him. This was only the beginning, but something had shifted in the room. The battle for his freedom had only just begun. The third day of the trial dawned with a heavy sense of inevitability hanging in the air. The courtroom was filled with a strange mix of tension and anticipation, a collective breath being held as the story continued to unfold. Elon Musk sat in his usual spot, hands folded, his face set in a quiet expression of resolve. His attorneys were back in the trenches, preparing to take the next steps in their defense strategy. And there was something different about this day, something that Musk knew would change the entire trajectory of the trial. Behind the scenes, Jessica Grant, Musk's lead attorney, was finalizing a legal maneuver that she knew would surprise everyone in the room, especially the prosecution. For weeks, they had been preparing for this moment, running simulations and carefully studying the prosecution's every move. But what they hadn't counted on was Musk's ability to think outside the box, even when it came to his defense. Jessica looked at her team and nodded. Let's do it. We're going to change the game today. The clock ticked down to the moment when the trial resumed, and as the court reconvened, Musk's legal team was ready. The judge, a seasoned and no-nonsense figure, called the court to order and signaled for Jessica to present her argument. We would like to submit new evidence, Your Honor, Jessica began, her voice calm but carrying a hint of excitement beneath the surface. The room fell into a hushed silence. The prosecution looked at each other, their expressions skeptical. Musk's defense team had already been making their case about his intent, but they were about to take it a step further. With a swift motion, Jessica handed over a series of documents to the court clerk, who passed them along to the judge. The papers were printed with meticulous detail, containing transcripts of internal communications within Musk's companies and financial experts who had provided advice on his public statements regarding Tesla's stock price. These weren't just random communications. They were private emails between Musk and some of his closest advisors, people who had worked with him for years. The documents contained something that no one had anticipated, clear evidence that Musk had consulted with experts before making his controversial statements, and that he had acted in what he believed was the best interest of Tesla's investors. The courtroom buzzed with shock as the defense team unveiled its surprise. For the prosecution, it was a gut punch. They had expected Musk to be a rogue, acting on instinct and making rash decisions. But what they had just learned was something much more troubling. Musk had sought advice from financial experts before making statements that had sent shockwaves through the market. The evidence pointed to one crucial detail: the tweets had not been arbitrary, they were part of a larger strategy, a strategy that had been carefully thought through, and one that had aimed at driving the market in a direction that aligned with Musk's broader vision for Tesla. Jessica continued her argument, turning to the jury with renewed confidence. This evidence shows that Mr. Musk was not acting alone. He sought advice. He consulted with people who were experts in the field. His intention was not to mislead or manipulate the market. In fact, he did everything in his power to ensure that his actions were not only legal but aligned with his responsibilities to Tesla and its investors. The jury exchanged looks of confusion and curiosity. The defense had just shifted the narrative completely. It was no longer a case of reckless, impulsive behavior, it was a case of a man who was working within the boundaries of the law, who was being transparent and seeking advice from those who were experts in market behavior. In one fell swoop, Musk's team had reframed the case. Sarah Jennings, the lead prosecutor, stood up, visibly rattled by the sudden turn of events. She cleared her throat before addressing the judge, trying to regain composure. "Your Honor, this new evidence is irrelevant to the charges at hand. It's nothing more than an attempt to distract from the real issue, that Mr. Musk deliberately misled the public in order to profit from the manipulation of stock prices." Jessica didn't flinch. She was prepared for this. "Actually, Mrs. Jennings, this evidence directly counters your claims. It proves that Elon Musk was not acting in isolation, but as part of a well-considered strategy with the best interests of the company and its stakeholders at heart. You cannot claim market manipulation when the actions were guided by expert analysis and were part of a long-term vision for Tesla." As the defense and prosecution clashed over the significance of the evidence, Musk remained calm, his mind still buzzing with ideas. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom, he was fighting for something much larger, his vision for the future, for the companies he had built from the ground up, and for the thousands of employees and investors who had believed in him from the very beginning. But today, something had shifted. Musk knew that the game had changed. By the time the court session ended, the jury was left to grapple with the new information. They had learned more about Elon Musk's strategic thinking, about the complexity of his decisions, and about the man behind the headlines. The prosecution's case no longer felt as airtight as it once had. And the public, who had been watching the trial unfold with bated breath, was starting to question everything they thought they knew about Musk's intentions. As Musk left the courtroom that day, a quiet sense of victory washed over him. It wasn't the end, but it was a significant turning point. He had successfully used his understanding of the law and his innovative thinking to flip the script. Musk had done what he did best, he had used his genius to outsmart the system that was trying to take him down. Outside the courtroom, reporters were already clamoring for answers, their cameras flashing as they attempted to catch Musk's reaction. But Musk didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, he walked past the crowd, his face a mask of calm determination. For the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope. His legal team had played their cards right, and it was clear that the tide was beginning to turn in his favor. But there was no time to rest. The battle was far from over, and the next chapter of this saga would be the true test of Musk's genius. The courtroom was more packed than ever on the fourth day of the trial. The air felt heavy with anticipation as the crowd outside the courthouse buzzed with speculation about what would happen next. Elon Musk, the man of the hour, was seated at the defense table, the same calm expression he had worn since the trial began. It was clear to anyone who looked closely that something had shifted in him. Musk wasn't just defending himself in a legal battle, he was embarking on a deeply personal journey. But while the media portrayed the trial as a battle for his freedom, Musk knew that it was also about something far more important, a battle to protect his legacy. His mind was racing as the clock ticked down to the beginning of the day's proceedings. In many ways, he felt like he was walking on a tightrope. One misstep could lead to disaster, but his legal team had worked tirelessly to ensure that they were ready for whatever came next. Jessica Grant, his lead attorney, stood beside him, her expression focused but understanding. "This is the moment, Elon," she said quietly, her voice a soothing balm against the pressure of the situation. "Today, we show the jury the real you. Not just the tweets, not just the stock market drama, but the person behind the vision." Musk nodded, his gaze shifting to the court. There was something about this case that felt different than any other challenge he had faced. It wasn't just about business or technology. It was about perception, the way people viewed him, the way they misunderstood him. Musk had always been a person of extremes, driven by a singular vision to change the world. But that vision had come at a cost. The media had painted him as reckless, a genius who was too impulsive for his own good. Now, in this courtroom, the world would see whether his brilliance could overcome the narratives that had been built around him. The session began, and Sarah Jennings, the prosecutor, took her place at the podium once again. She was determined, focused, and all too aware that her case was beginning to falter. The new evidence presented by Musk's team had rocked the foundation of her argument, and now she needed something that could shift the tide back in her favor. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Jennings began, her tone cold and calculated, "we are not here to debate Elon Musk's vision or his desire to change the world. We are here to determine whether or not he violated the law. Whether or not he intentionally misled investors for his own gain. And the evidence we've shown you is clear. Musk used his platform to make misleading statements that affected stock prices and, ultimately, the lives of everyday investors." She held up another series of tweets on the screen. These tweets were from months after the infamous, "Tesla stock price is too high" IMO message. Musk had tweeted multiple times about Tesla's financial position and the stock's value, leading some investors to act on those words. But what you've heard from the defense is an attempt to justify his actions as part of some visionary mission. The truth is much simpler. Musk's words were manipulative, and those who followed his advice lost millions. He didn't just break the law, he abused his influence for personal profit. As the words left Jennings' mouth, Musk felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He could hear the crowd whispering, some nodding in agreement, others looking skeptical. The pressure was mounting, but Musk knew he couldn't let this narrative control the trial. He needed to show them the truth. At that moment, Jessica Grant stood up. The defense was ready to counterattack, not just with facts and evidence, but with something more personal. Something that could make the jury see Elon Musk not as a billionaire playing the stock market, but as a human being with a vision that had often led him to take risks others wouldn't dare. "Your Honor, we would like to call Mr. Musk to the stand." The courtroom gasped. Elon Musk had never been on the stand before. He was known for his quick wit, his sharp mind, and his ability to outmaneuver anyone. But this was different. Now, he had to open up about his motivations, his fears, and the true nature of his actions. The judge nodded, and Musk stood up, walking slowly to the witness chair. As he took his seat, the courtroom was silent. All eyes were on him. Jessica turned to him, a quiet encouragement in her eyes. She knew this was going to be hard, but Musk had always been someone who thrived when he could tell his story. It was time for the world to hear it. "Mr. Musk," Jessica began, her voice calm and steady. "Why don't you tell us, in your own words, what your intentions were behind the tweets in question?" Musk cleared his throat, his hands gripping the edges of the witness stand. This wasn't easy for him. He was used to being in control, used to navigating problems with logic and strategy. But this was personal. He was about to share something deeply vulnerable. "I've always been driven by a desire to make a difference," Musk began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I've always believed that humanity is capable of more than what we've been told. That we can change the world, that we can solve the problems that others don't even think are possible. Tesla is just a piece of that puzzle. It's not just about making cars. It's about changing the way we think about energy, about our future, about our planet. His voice faltered for a moment, but he pushed through. When I tweet something about Tesla, it's never about the stock price. It's about making people think. It's about getting them to question the status quo. I know it might seem reckless, but it's part of a larger vision. A vision to move us all forward. And sometimes, when you're trying to do something this big, you have to take risks. You have to shake people up. But I never intended to mislead anyone or harm anyone. That's not who I am. There was a heavy silence in the room as Musk's words hung in the air. For the first time in the trial, the jury saw the human side of Elon Musk, the man behind the controversy. He wasn't just a billionaire playing a game of numbers, he was someone with a passion, with ideals, and with a vision for the future that drove every decision he made. Jessica paused, then asked the question that would be the turning point. Mr. Musk, do you believe that your actions and your statements were taken in good faith, with the best interests of Tesla and its investors in mind? Musk didn't hesitate. Yes. Every decision I made, every tweet, was meant to push Tesla forward, to make people believe in what we were doing. I never sought to deceive anyone. And if I've made mistakes, I take responsibility for that. But I never intended for anyone to be hurt by it. There was a long pause. The jury was listening intently, and for the first time, they were seeing a side of Musk that they hadn't expected. It wasn't the arrogant billionaire they had read about in the news. It was a man with flaws, yes, but also a man with a mission, a man who genuinely believed in the future he was creating. As Musk finished speaking, the courtroom was dead silent. He had laid his heart bare, and the emotional weight of his words hung over the room. The next day in the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. The defense had made a powerful statement, and Elon Musk's emotional testimony had made its mark. The jury was visibly more engaged, their faces a mixture of contemplation and doubt as they processed everything they had heard. The media, which had been relentless in their portrayal of Musk as a reckless billionaire, was starting to waver in its narrative. But despite the shift in public perception, the battle was far from over. The prosecution, led by the unyielding Sarah Jennings, was determined not to let Musk's testimony sway the jury. She had been sharp and methodical in her approach, and she wasn't about to give up without a fight. The day began with a tense silence hanging over the courtroom. The judge called the session to order, and Musk's legal team remained on high alert, anticipating the next move from the prosecution. The clock ticked down as Sarah Jennings stood, ready to make her counterattack. "We have heard from Mr. Musk about his so-called vision," Jennings began, her voice laced with skepticism. But vision does not excuse breaking the law. And while he may claim that his tweets were in the best interest of his company, the fact remains that they caused real harm. This is not about vision. This is about manipulation. She turned to the jury, her gaze firm and unyielding. This trial is not about understanding Mr. Musk's intentions or his feelings. It's about whether he deliberately misled investors, causing them to make decisions based on false information. Whether he used his platform to manipulate the market for personal gain. As she spoke, Musk sat quietly at the defense table, his eyes locked on Jennings. There was no visible anger, no defensiveness, just a calm determination. He had already made his case. But he knew that today, his team would have to rely on the most unexpected piece of evidence they had uncovered, a truth that had remained hidden until now. Jessica Grant, his lead attorney, leaned in and whispered something to Musk. He nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. The truth, she had assured him, would be the turning point in this trial. The courtroom settled into a hush as Jessica stood and called for a brief recess. When they returned, there was a palpable tension in the air. The judge looked at both sides and asked if there was any new evidence to present. "We would like to submit additional evidence, Your Honor," Jessica said, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed a glint of anticipation. She turned to face the jury, her words deliberate. "We have uncovered new documents documents that were previously hidden from view, that could change everything. The courtroom held its breath as Jessica's team handed over a folder of new evidence. The judge reviewed the documents, and the courtroom was left in stunned silence. This was the moment the defense had been preparing for. Jessica continued, her eyes now fixed on Sarah Jennings. This new evidence reveals that not only did Mr. Musk consult with financial experts prior to making his public statements, but he also provided documentation showing that the stock price fluctuations were not caused by his words alone. In fact, the evidence shows that multiple institutional investors were making moves based on insider information, and those moves, in turn, affected Tesla's stock price. Musk's heart raced as the weight of the moment sunk in. This wasn't just about proving his innocence, it was about exposing the truth, a truth that had been buried for far too long. The documents were displayed on the screen for the jury to see. They were internal communications between top-tier investors and members of the Tesla board. There were email chains and phone records that showed a clear pattern of coordinated actions within a network of high-profile individuals. The documents revealed that certain investors had been working behind the scenes to manipulate the stock price for their own benefit, using the chaos generated by Musk's tweets as cover for their actions. Sarah Jennings' face turned pale as the documents flashed on the screen. She stood frozen for a moment before composing herself. This was a blow she hadn't anticipated. Musk's defense team wasn't just fighting for his freedom, they were fighting to expose a much larger conspiracy. A conspiracy that had gone unnoticed, hidden beneath layers of financial gamesmanship and corporate maneuvering. Jessica Grant seized the moment. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you are seeing is not just an attempt to clear Mr. Musk's name. What you are seeing is evidence of a coordinated effort to manipulate the market, an effort that involved several high-profile figures who used the very chaos created by Musk's public statements to profit at the expense of everyday investors. Mr. Musk's actions may have sparked the controversy, but they were not the cause of the financial turmoil that followed. The true manipulators were not just those who made public statements, but those who had inside access and used it to their advantage. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the implications of the new evidence sank in. The jury's eyes darted between the documents and Musk's legal team. What had started as a case against Musk now looked more like an investigation into widespread financial corruption. Musk's defense had pulled off a masterstroke, revealing that the real perpetrators may have been operating far beyond the scope of his tweets. Sarah Jennings was quick to react, but there was a noticeable crack in her composure. This is absurd. You can't just deflect the blame to others. We are here to determine whether or not Mr. Musk violated the law. This new evidence changes nothing. But Jessica remained calm, undeterred by the prosecution's attempt to regain control. This evidence does not absolve Mr. Musk of all responsibility. However, it does prove one thing: there were powerful forces at play that went beyond his actions. Forces that manipulated the situation for their own gain, and now, it is time for the truth to come to light. For the first time in the trial, the prosecution seemed uncertain. Sarah Jennings, usually composed, found herself struggling to keep her arguments intact. The jury was visibly torn, their expressions ranging from disbelief to intrigue. The tide was turning. The pieces were falling into place, and it was clear that this trial was no longer just about Musk. It was about a much larger scandal, one that could shake the foundations of the financial world. As the day came to a close, Musk's legal team felt the weight of the moment. They had not only defended their client, they had revealed a truth that could change everything. And as Musk left the courtroom, he felt something he hadn't felt in days: hope. The following morning, the courtroom was charged with an electric sense of tension. After the bombshell revelations from the day before, no one quite knew how to react. The defense had thrown the prosecution into disarray, and even those who had doubted Elon Musk were beginning to question the narrative they'd been fed. The case had taken an unexpected turn, and the stakes were now higher than ever. As Musk entered the courtroom, his demeanor remained composed, but beneath the surface, he was more aware than ever of the gravity of the situation. His legal team had managed to expose a much deeper issue than anyone anticipated. And as the day unfolded, it became increasingly clear that this was not just a courtroom drama, it was a battle for something much larger. Musk's reputation, Tesla's future, and even the integrity of the financial system itself were on the line. The prosecution, still reeling from the previous day's revelations, appeared determined to salvage whatever they could. Sarah Jennings, ever the professional, wasted no time in trying to regain the upper hand. She stood up, her usual calm now laced with urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Jennings began, her voice sharper than usual, "we are all aware of the defense's attempt to distract from the real issue here. Mr. Musk's tweets were not just random thoughts, they were calculated decisions, made with full knowledge of their impact. And while the defense would have you believe that this case is about corporate malfeasance at a higher level, the simple fact remains that Mr. Musk is the one who made those statements. He is the one who opened this door, and it is his responsibility to answer for what happened next." She glanced at Musk as she spoke, her eyes steely. "It's easy to point fingers when the truth is inconvenient. But we are here today to determine accountability. The facts are clear, and the evidence we've shown proves that Mr. Musk's public comments were more than just a mistake, they were deliberate acts of financial manipulation." The word stung, but Musk didn't flinch. He knew Jennings was trying to cling to the last shred of her argument. And yet, Musk's team had done something brilliant. They hadn't just defended him, they had planted seeds of doubt that were now growing into a full-blown crisis for the prosecution. The jury was listening more carefully now, and it was clear that they were weighing the evidence in a way they hadn't before. Jessica Grant, seeing the opportunity, stood up to speak. She wasn't going to let Jennings get away with painting Musk as the sole villain in this story. "Ms. Jennings, with all due respect, your argument doesn't address the heart of the issue," Jessica said, her voice steady but forceful. "What we revealed yesterday wasn't a distraction, it was the key to understanding what actually happened. Mr. Musk's actions may have sparked a series of events, but they were not the cause of the financial turmoil that followed. The truth is that powerful, well-connected individuals manipulated the situation for their own financial gain. They knew exactly what they were doing." She pointed to the new evidence on the screen, which had sent shockwaves through the courtroom the day before. "These documents show that institutional investors were acting on inside information that had nothing to do with Mr. Musk's tweets. They saw an opportunity, and they capitalized on it, all while using Musk's public statements as a smokescreen." The prosecutor's face tightened. She had to find a way to rebut this new information or risk losing the jury's confidence completely. But she wasn't ready to concede. "Your Honor, these so-called documents don't change the fact that Mr. Musk knowingly misled investors. It's clear that his words had a direct impact on the stock price. And regardless of what others did, Mr. Musk is responsible for his own actions." The judge, who had been following the arguments carefully, turned to the jury. "We will take a brief recess before resuming, but I want to remind everyone that the focus here is not to speculate about the actions of others, it is to focus on the actions of the defendant. The jury is to consider only the evidence presented in this court." As the recess began, Musk couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. He had always prided himself on his ability to think several steps ahead, to outsmart his opponents in business and in life. But today, he was beginning to realize the full weight of what he was up against. This wasn't just a trial about a few tweets, it was about something far larger, a battle over the very structure of power in the financial world. Jessica Grant pulled Musk aside during the break, her expression serious. "Elon, I need you to understand something. We've thrown a wrench into their case, but that doesn't mean we've won yet. They'll fight back. They'll do everything they can to discredit us, to make this about anything but the real issue. You need to stay focused. Stay calm." Musk nodded, though his mind was racing. He had always been the one to make bold moves, to challenge the system. But now, he realized that this wasn't just about winning. It was about making a statement, about showing the world that there were forces at play far beyond what anyone had imagined. As the trial resumed, Sarah Jennings attempted a final push. She called upon several financial experts who were eager to testify about the damage Musk's tweets had caused to the stock market. They spoke passionately about the volatility that ensued, and how it affected both institutional investors and small traders. Their testimony was compelling, but there was a key flaw in their arguments: they were all painting Musk as the sole architect of the chaos. Jessica Grant, on the other hand, had something else up her sleeve. She had subpoenaed several key players from the world of high finance, individuals who had insight into the deeper machinations that had fueled the stock market reaction to Musk's tweets. One by one, they took the stand, and their testimonies began to reveal a shocking truth: the market had been manipulated on a much larger scale than anyone had imagined. One of the experts, a former Wall Street insider named Thomas Cole, explained how institutional investors had been using Musk's public statements to cover their own financial moves. Mr. Musk may have set the stage, but the real players were behind the scenes, orchestrating a much larger scheme. They had insider information, and they used that to influence the market in ways that were not just unethical, they were illegal. The jury listened intently as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. This wasn't just about Musk's tweets. This was about a coordinated effort to manipulate the financial system at a level most people never saw. By the end of the day, it was clear that the defense had succeeded in shifting the narrative. Musk was no longer the sole villain in this story. In fact, the jury was beginning to question whether he was even guilty at all. As the courtroom session concluded, Elon Musk allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. For the first time in days, he felt the weight of the battle lifting off his shoulders. They had done it. They had exposed the hidden truth. But Musk knew that this was just the beginning. The game was still on. The next few days in court felt like an emotional roller coaster. The prosecution was slowly losing its grip on the case, but they were far from conceding defeat. And Musk's team, while riding the momentum of their recent victories, knew that this battle was far from over. In fact, the real war was just beginning. As the trial continued, more and more pieces of the puzzle began to emerge, pieces that weren't just about Musk, but about the people who had helped build the empire he commanded. Behind every success story, behind every major decision, there were shadows lurking. These were people with their own agendas, with their own motivations, and now, some of those very people were beginning to shift their allegiances. Elon Musk had always surrounded himself with a tight-knit group of powerful and loyal individuals. His advisors, his partners, and his closest friends were the pillars that had helped him rise to the top. But as the courtroom drama unfolded, those same pillars started to crack. The more Musk's defense team revealed, the more cracks appeared in the once unshakable foundation of his business empire. The first shockwave came when a key witness, someone Musk had trusted for years, suddenly turned on him. Ryan Mitchell, Musk's former CFO, was called to the stand by the prosecution. Ryan had been an integral part of Tesla's rise, a man who had helped steer the company through its toughest financial times. Musk had always trusted Ryan's judgment, and they had shared countless hours strategizing together. Ryan's departure from Tesla had been abrupt, and now, as the prosecution called him to testify, Musk's worst fears were about to be realized. Ryan stepped into the witness box with a composed, almost rehearsed air. His gaze was steady, his posture confident, but something was different. He wasn't the same man who had once been by Musk's side, working tirelessly to build the Tesla empire. This man now had the look of someone who was about to deliver a devastating blow. "Mr. Mitchell," Sarah Jennings began, her voice cold and calculated. "You've been with Mr. Musk through some of the most critical moments in Tesla's history. How would you describe your relationship with him?" Ryan's eyes met the prosecutor's, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I worked closely with Elon for many years. We were colleagues, friends. I admired his vision. But ultimately, I had to part ways because I couldn't condone some of the things happening behind the scenes." Musk felt a coldness in his chest as he listened to Ryan's words. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Ryan had been a confidant, a trusted ally. And now, here he was, implying that he had known about, and perhaps even condoned, something that Musk had always denied. Jennings continued, pressing Ryan for more details. You've stated that you couldn't condone some of the things happening behind the scenes. What exactly are you referring to? Ryan hesitated for a moment, his fingers tapping on the wooden surface of the witness stand. Then he spoke, his voice steady. When I left Tesla, I did so because I realized there were actions being taken, decisions being made, that didn't align with my values. There was a level of manipulation, of leveraging power in ways that I couldn't endorse. It wasn't just about financial decisions. It was about power. And that's when I knew it was time to step away. The courtroom went silent. Musk's stomach dropped. He had suspected that Ryan's departure had been more than just a matter of personal differences, but hearing it spoken aloud was a gut-wrenching blow. Ryan had been his closest ally, and now it seemed that he had turned against him. Jennings wasted no time capitalizing on the moment. So, Mr. Mitchell, would you say that Mr. Musk, by making his public statements, despite knowing the consequences, was involved in this manipulation? Ryan's eyes shifted briefly to Musk, and there was a brief flicker of something, regret, perhaps, before he answered. Yes. I believe his actions, while perhaps not intentionally malicious, contributed to the situation. He created a climate in which others took advantage of the volatility. And in the business world, that's as dangerous as direct manipulation. Musk's mind was racing. His former CFO, a man who had stood by his side through thick and thin, was now implicating him. The prosecution's case was growing stronger by the minute, and Musk was starting to feel the weight of the situation in a way he hadn't before. If Ryan, someone he had trusted implicitly, was willing to throw him under the bus, what did that mean for the rest of his empire? But there was no time to dwell on this. As the day wore on, Musk's team regrouped. They couldn't afford to lose focus now. If Ryan Mitchell had turned on Musk, it wasn't just a betrayal, it was an opportunity. Musk had always believed that adversity could be turned into an advantage, and he wasn't going to let this crisis slip by without finding a way to turn the tide back in his favor. That night, as he sat in his hotel room, Musk couldn't sleep. The trial was consuming his every thought. Ryan's testimony had cut deep, but he refused to let it define him. There was something else at play here, something that he knew had been lurking in the shadows. It was time to fight back, and this time, Musk would not only defend himself, but also expose the true extent of the conspiracy against him. If Ryan Mitchell was trying to break him, then it was time to break the system that had allowed such betrayal to happen. Musk's legal team gathered the next morning, ready to launch their counterattack. Jessica Grant was the first to speak. We need to reframe this. Ryan Mitchell may have turned on us, but his words don't define the truth. We know what happened, and we're going to prove it. We need to put the focus back on the real criminals, those who used the chaos for their own gain. Musk nodded. He knew they were right. The road ahead would be tough, but he was ready. It was time to expose the true manipulators. And this time, he wouldn't be alone. The courtroom buzzed with energy as the prosecution's momentum seemed to surge after Ryan Mitchell's testimony. But the defense team was already preparing their counterattack. Elon Musk had always been someone who thrived under pressure, and this trial was no exception. In fact, the more the odds were stacked against him, the more he seemed to find new ways to maneuver, to outthink those trying to tear him down. Musk stood tall, his mind calculating, his resolve unwavering. Despite the overwhelming sense of betrayal he had felt from Ryan's testimony, he knew the game wasn't over. If anything, it was time to step up his strategy. The defense team met in a conference room just before the next session, surrounded by a vast array of documents, legal papers, and digital evidence. Jessica Grant, leading the team with poise and precision, was already outlining their next steps. Ryan's testimony was a blow, no doubt. But it also opens a door, she began, looking directly at Musk. We need to turn his betrayal into a tool to expose what's been happening behind the scenes. The public doesn't need to focus on your supposed role in the chaos anymore. We need to prove that the manipulation didn't end with you. Musk nodded slowly. What's the plan? Jessica smiled, a rare glint of excitement in her eyes. We go after the money. We go after the institutions that have been pulling the strings, using your name as a cover to execute their own agendas. Musk's mind raced. He was no stranger to playing the game at the highest level, and now he understood what needed to be done. Ryan Mitchell may have turned on him, but there was still an opportunity to flip the narrative. Musk knew that if he could expose the financial forces conspiring against him, it would not only shift the focus of the trial but could potentially dismantle a larger conspiracy at play. As the courtroom session resumed, the atmosphere had shifted. The prosecution's case, built on the testimony of Ryan Mitchell and their interpretation of Musk's actions, was no longer as solid as it once seemed. The defense had started to refocus the argument, highlighting the systemic manipulation by financial elites. It was a bold move, but Musk was confident that it would be the turning point in the trial. The first witness called by the defense was a whistleblower from a major investment firm, someone who had kept quiet for years, knowing the dangerous game being played behind closed doors. His name was Thomas Jennings, a former senior executive who had seen firsthand how institutions were using public figures like Musk to execute complex financial strategies. Mr. Jennings, Jessica began, can you explain to the court how institutional investors used Elon Musk's public persona and statements to manipulate the stock market? Jennings, a man in his early 50s with a graying beard and weary eyes, leaned forward on the witness stand. He looked uncomfortable, yet determined to speak the truth. What happened was calculated. We saw Musk as a target, a way to shift the market. His tweets, his public persona, they were a tool. Investors saw an opportunity to profit off of the volatility that followed his statements. They didn't care about the long-term implications, just about making quick money. He paused for a moment before continuing. The truth is, it wasn't just Musk's actions causing the chaos. It was the way investors manipulated the situation. They would intentionally move the market in response to Musk's words, knowing that others would react. They'd create panic, and then they'd buy or sell positions based on that panic. It was a game, and Musk was being used as the pawn. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. This was it. This was the moment Musk had been waiting for. The narrative was shifting. The focus was no longer solely on his actions, it was now squarely on the puppet masters behind the scenes. Jessica turned back to the jury, her voice steady but filled with passion. What Mr. Jennings is describing here is not an isolated incident. This is systemic manipulation, financial exploitation masked as a series of unfortunate events. The people who benefited from these manipulations are the ones who should be sitting in that defendant's chair. Not Elon Musk. Musk's eyes locked on the faces of the jurors, carefully observing their reactions. He could see it, he could feel it, this wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It had become a crusade to expose the corruption and deceit that had been operating in the shadows for far too long. The next day, Musk's team introduced a new set of evidence, financial documents showing a pattern of trading activity from institutional investors that coincided with Musk's most controversial tweets. These weren't just coincidences. They were planned moves, well-executed financial strategies designed to benefit from the very chaos that had followed Musk's public statements. As the documents were presented, Musk's legal team worked methodically to prove that the market reactions were not solely driven by Musk's words, but by a coordinated effort among institutional investors. The jury began to shift their perspective. They saw that the manipulation was larger than Musk, and they began to understand that he had been a pawn in a much larger game. But as Musk's legal team pushed forward, they hit a significant roadblock. The prosecution called in a final witness, an expert witness with a reputation for being a strong advocate for the financial industry. His name was James Falcon, a high-powered financial analyst with connections to some of the biggest names on Wall Street. He had a reputation for being ruthless in defending financial institutions and their practices. James Falcon took the stand with confidence, his sharp suit and polished demeanor making it clear that he was used to being in control. The defense's argument is based on a false premise, Falcon began, addressing the jury with a calm yet forceful tone. Mr. Musk's statements were not just careless words, they were reckless actions that had a direct and measurable impact on the stock market. And regardless of the manipulations of others, it was Mr. Musk's decision to make those statements. He is the one who must be held accountable. Musk felt the weight of Falcon's words. The prosecution was pulling out all the stops, and it was clear that Falcon's testimony was meant to solidify the narrative that Musk's tweets were the primary cause of the market chaos. Jessica Grant, however, was ready for this moment. She stood up and approached the witness stand with calm confidence. "Mr. Falcon, with all due respect, you are ignoring the larger picture here. You're focusing on the actions of one individual without acknowledging the systemic forces at play. The market doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's influenced by a network of powerful players who manipulate it for their own gain." Falcon's expression tightened, but he held his ground. "You're suggesting that Mr. Musk was just a victim of a larger conspiracy? That's a convenient excuse, but it doesn't change the facts." Jessica's voice grew firmer. "No, Mr. Falcon, I'm saying that the facts show that Mr. Musk was used as a pawn in a larger game of financial manipulation. And that's the truth that needs to be heard in this courtroom." The courtroom was filled with an intense silence as the weight of Jessica's words hung in the air. Elon Musk, for the first time in days, allowed himself a brief moment of hope. The tide was turning. They were gaining ground. The days leading up to the closing arguments were filled with tension. Each day seemed to drag on longer than the last, but the momentum had clearly shifted. Elon Musk's defense team was on the offensive, exposing the layers of manipulation by the powerful institutions that had hidden behind the curtain for far too long. And while the battle in the courtroom was far from over, Musk felt like they had finally regained control of the narrative. Jessica Grant, as usual, was leading the charge. Her strategy of focusing on the hidden financial forces at play had turned the tide, but there was one final piece of the puzzle to solve, the truth behind the orchestrated financial chaos that had led to the trial. She needed to make one last push to show the jury the true nature of the conspiracy, and she was going to do so by unmasking the puppet masters once and for all. Musk stood in the back of the courtroom, his eyes focused on the proceedings. His mind was sharp, calculating. He was no stranger to risk. Every business venture, every innovation had been a calculated gamble, and this trial was no different. The stakes were higher than anything he had ever faced, but he was determined to win. As the defense team prepared to give their closing arguments, Jessica stood up, her voice steady but filled with purpose. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, locking eyes with each of them, "you've heard a lot in this trial, about Musk's tweets, about his actions, and about the consequences of those actions. But what we've also heard are disturbing revelations about the true forces at play here. Forces that used Elon Musk as a pawn in their game." She paused for a moment to let her words sink in before continuing. "This isn't just about a few careless words or reckless behavior. It's about a systematic pattern of manipulation, where powerful institutions sought to exploit the market volatility that Musk's public persona created. They used his name, his brand, as a tool for their own financial gain. And they did it with impunity." Jessica's voice grew stronger. "The defense has shown you the documents, the evidence that links these powerful institutions to the market chaos. We've shown you that Musk was not the orchestrator of this chaos. He was, in fact, a victim of it." The jury was captivated, their faces a mix of disbelief and fascination. It was clear that Jessica had struck a nerve. Musk felt a surge of hope, but he knew the final moments were critical. The jury needed to understand that this case wasn't just about him. It was about the people who had been pulling the strings in the shadows, orchestrating a financial symphony that no one had ever truly questioned. As Jessica continued, Musk's thoughts drifted to the one person who had been most responsible for exposing this conspiracy, Thomas Jennings, the whistleblower from the investment firm. His testimony had been a game-changer, but there was still one piece of the puzzle missing. Musk knew it was time to reveal the truth. He had been keeping something back, something so explosive that it could alter the entire course of the trial. The moment arrived. With a calm but commanding voice, Musk stood up, his figure cutting through the tension in the room. The courtroom fell silent as all eyes turned to him. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Musk began, his voice measured but filled with the weight of the moment, "there's something I need to add to this discussion. Something that could change everything." The judge looked at Musk, surprised by his sudden decision to speak. "Mr. Musk, we are in the final stages of the trial. I must remind you that we are nearing the closing arguments. Are you sure you want to do this now?" Musk nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I need to tell the truth. The whole truth." He turned to the jury, his gaze steady. "I have spent the last few days listening to testimonies about market manipulation, about financial exploitation. But I've also listened to the accusations against me. And while I do take responsibility for my words, I was not the cause of the chaos. In fact, I was the one who was manipulated. And I can prove it." Musk's legal team looked at him in shock. They hadn't expected him to reveal anything so dramatic at this stage, but Jessica nodded subtly, signaling that she trusted him to handle it. "I'm sure you've all heard of the investment firm called Argon Capital," Musk continued, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "They are the ones who have been behind many of the market moves that were tied to my statements. But what you don't know is that I've recently uncovered some shocking information." Musk paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. Argon Capital wasn't just manipulating the market. They were influencing the news, shaping the public perception of me. And the most damning part? They've been working with people in this very room to create the chaos. The very same people who have been using me as a scapegoat. The courtroom erupted into a flurry of whispers, the air thick with disbelief. Musk's words had shaken everyone to their core. He had just dropped a bombshell that no one had expected. "Mr. Musk, are you suggesting that the prosecution has been involved with Argon Capital?" asked the judge, his voice tinged with skepticism. Musk nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I have evidence that proves the connections. The same people who have been accusing me in this courtroom are the ones who have been profiting from the volatility I've unintentionally caused. And now they're trying to make me the fall guy." The defense team sprang into action, immediately requesting that the court allow them to present this new evidence. Jessica was already on her feet, directing the court's attention to the files that Musk had uncovered. "This is it," Jessica said, holding up a series of documents. "These are communications, transaction records, and reports that directly tie Argon Capital to the prosecution's financial backers. This is the final piece of the puzzle, and it changes everything." The judge, stunned by the revelation, ordered a brief recess to review the evidence. Musk's heart pounded in his chest as the court cleared, but he knew he had just played his final gambit. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just a case about his tweets. This was about exposing a vast network of manipulation, and he was ready to take them all down. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The courtroom was a whirlwind of activity as the brief recess was called. Musk's revelation had sent shockwaves through the room. The air was thick with whispers and murmurs, and every person in that room could feel the gravity of what had just been said. This wasn't just a case about financial missteps anymore. This was an all-out battle against the very forces that had been manipulating the system for their own gain. As the jurors filed out for the recess, Musk sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had known that revealing the truth would be risky, he was putting everything on the line. But the gamble had paid off. The evidence he'd brought to light, the connections between Argon Capital and the prosecution, had shifted the scales in his favor. But he also knew that the prosecution wouldn't back down. They would fight harder now, desperate to maintain control of the narrative and keep the pressure on Musk. The battle was far from over. Jessica Grant, his lead attorney, was already on her phone, organizing their next steps. She had a look of quiet determination on her face. "We've got them now," she said, glancing up from her screen. "This is bigger than anything we've anticipated. The tide has officially turned." Musk looked at her, his eyes narrowing with focus. "What happens next?" "We're going to push forward with everything we've got. We need to get those financial ties in front of the jury before the prosecution can twist the narrative again. And we'll be calling in a few more expert witnesses to back up your claims. The truth is on our side, Elon. This is the moment we've been waiting for." Meanwhile, in the prosecutor's corner, panic was setting in. Ryan Mitchell, the key witness for the prosecution, sat with a somber expression as his attorney rushed to speak with the head prosecutor. The situation had spiraled out of control. They had relied so heavily on Mitchell's testimony, painting Musk as the central cause of the market chaos. But now, the focus had shifted. The jury had seen the evidence. And there was no denying that the powerful financial institutions backing the prosecution had played a massive role in the manipulation Musk had been accused of. Mitchell's nerves were palpable. He had been the star witness, but now he feared the impact of Musk's bombshell. He had no idea that the game was going to shift so dramatically. Musk wasn't just fighting for his reputation, he was fighting to expose a larger conspiracy, and now, Mitchell realized, he might be caught in the crossfire. Back in the courtroom, the judge had returned, and the session resumed. The defense team was ready to present their new evidence, and Musk's heart pounded in anticipation. This was the critical moment. If they could solidify their case, the tide could turn in their favor permanently. Jessica Grant stood up, her voice calm and composed, but carrying an undeniable authority. "Your Honor, members of the jury, we have submitted new evidence that directly ties the prosecution's financial backers to the manipulations that have been the center of this trial. These connections are not speculative. They are concrete and irrefutable." She gestured toward the digital screen in the courtroom, where a series of documents appeared. Detailed communications, wire transfers, and financial documents that connected Argon Capital to several high-profile investors began to flash on the screen. Musk could feel his pulse quicken as the jury looked at the evidence with rapt attention. The documents painted a clear picture of a coordinated effort to create market volatility for financial gain. Each piece of evidence showed how institutional investors had capitalized on Musk's public persona, using his words to manipulate stock prices. It wasn't just about Musk's tweets, it was about how these financial institutions leveraged his public profile to create chaos and profit from it. Jessica addressed the jury, "This wasn't a case of one man acting recklessly, this was a systematic, well-organized financial strategy to destabilize the market. And Elon Musk was simply the unwitting tool in their hands." The prosecution's attorney, feeling the weight of the defense's attack, jumped up from his seat, trying to regain control of the courtroom. "Objection, Your Honor. This is all speculative. The defense is trying to shift the blame away from Musk by making baseless accusations against our financial backers. None of this has been proven." The judge, who had been following the evidence closely, raised his hand to silence the courtroom. Sustained. However, the jury is to consider the documents presented by the defense and determine their relevance to this case. Musk sat back in his chair, allowing himself a small moment of relief. The judge had just affirmed the relevance of the evidence. It wasn't a total victory yet, but it was a step in the right direction. As the court session continued, the defense presented a series of expert testimonies. First up was a financial analyst named Linda Blackwell, who had worked in investment banking for over 2 decades. She was an authority on market manipulation and had extensive experience with the types of strategies outlined in the defense's evidence. Linda took the stand, her demeanor confident and composed. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what we are seeing here is not a random series of events. It's a sophisticated pattern of financial exploitation, where influential investors use high-profile figures like Mr. Musk to manipulate the market for personal gain. She walked the jury through the various documents, explaining the strategies behind each trade and how they aligned with key moments in Musk's public life. Her testimony was thorough, providing an expert perspective that solidified the defense's argument. Next, a second expert witness, a renowned economist named Dr. Samuel Wright, was brought in to explain the larger implications of the market manipulation. What we are witnessing, Dr. Wright explained, is a direct manipulation of public perception for financial gain. The entire narrative that Musk is responsible for these market movements is not just flawed, it's designed to distract from the real forces at work, the financial institutions that profit from chaos. As Dr. Wright spoke, Musk felt the weight of the case shifting in his favor. The expert testimonies were powerful, and the jury seemed to be absorbing every word. But the prosecution wasn't backing down. In a last-ditch effort to salvage their case, they called in one final witness, Ryan Mitchell. He walked to the stand, looking weary but resolute. His testimony had already been a key pillar for the prosecution, but now, with the evidence mounting against them, the defense was ready to turn the tables. Jessica stood up and addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the same Ryan Mitchell who has already been exposed for his role in the financial manipulations against Mr. Musk. Now, as the prosecution's key witness, his credibility is in question. I will leave it to you to decide whether or not to trust a man who has already shown he's willing to change his story for a paycheck. Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. He had no idea how much his testimony would cost him. The pressure was mounting, and Musk could sense it. Ryan Mitchell was beginning to crack. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the day wore on. Every person in the room, from the jurors to the lawyers to the audience, seemed to hold their breath as they awaited the final moments of the trial. It had been a battle like no other, one where truth, lies, and manipulation had collided in a storm of legal warfare. Now, it was all coming down to this, the closing statements. Elon Musk sat quietly at the defense table, his face betraying no emotion. He had been through many high-pressure situations before, but nothing like this. The stakes couldn't be higher. His entire career, his reputation, and his future were on the line. Yet, there was something about this moment that felt different. He had faced adversity before, be it through the challenges of launching SpaceX or the relentless criticism he'd received over the years. But this was the first time he was not just fighting for himself, he was fighting for truth itself. Jessica Grant stood beside him, her eyes scanning the room as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The defense had laid out a compelling case. They had exposed the web of financial manipulation that had been pulled over Musk's eyes. They had demonstrated how powerful investors and institutions had used him as a pawn, pushing the market into chaos for their own benefit. Musk had been caught in the crossfire, a figurehead whose words were twisted into weapons by those who stood to profit. And now, it was time to expose the last, devastating piece of evidence. But before the closing arguments could begin, the prosecution's star witness, Ryan Mitchell, took the stand once again. His face was a picture of unease, his confidence from earlier days shattered. The pressure of the trial had taken its toll on him, and now it was clear that he was struggling to maintain control of the narrative. Mitchell's testimony had been the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. He had painted Musk as a reckless billionaire, indifferent to the chaos he caused in the stock market with his tweets. But now, as Musk and his team had revealed the depth of the financial conspiracy behind the scenes, Mitchell's credibility had been shattered. Musk had seen the fear in Mitchell's eyes when the defense had introduced the evidence of Argon Capital's involvement. The man was starting to break under the pressure. As Mitchell began to speak, his voice trembled slightly. "I stand by my testimony," he said, though there was a distinct crack in his tone. Musk's actions were irresponsible. The market was affected by his words, and he should be held accountable. But there was something different about his delivery now. His words lacked the conviction they once had, and Musk could see the cracks in Mitchell's facade. It was clear that the defense's strategy was working. The once strong prosecution was now faltering, struggling to hold on to its case. Jessica Grant, ever the strategist, saw the opening and seized it. She stood up, addressing the court with a calm, but unshakable authority. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have all witnessed the unraveling of this case. The truth is staring us in the face. Mr. Mitchell may have once been the key witness for the prosecution, but now we know that his testimony was not just flawed, it was compromised." She turned to Mitchell, her eyes locking with his. "Mr. Mitchell, you have been a pawn in a much larger game. A game that you didn't understand until it was too late. But now, your credibility is gone. The truth has come to light, and it is not in your favor." Mitchell's face flushed with anger and embarrassment, but he couldn't refute her words. His eyes flicked nervously toward the prosecution's table, as if hoping for some kind of reassurance, but none came. Jessica continued, "The evidence we've presented clearly shows that there was a coordinated effort to manipulate the market using Mr. Musk's public persona. Argonne Capital, the very financial institution that has backed this prosecution, played a direct role in exploiting Musk and others for their own profit. They created the chaos and used Mr. Musk as a scapegoat." The jury was silent, their eyes fixed on the proceedings. The defense's arguments had been compelling, and now, with Mitchell's faltering testimony, the case was looking more and more like an orchestrated attack against Musk, one he had been unaware of but was now fighting to expose. "Mr. Musk," Jessica said, turning toward her client, "was a victim in all of this. He was manipulated by those in power, financial powerhouses who knew exactly how to use his influence to their advantage. But Mr. Musk is not the villain in this story. He is a man who has been dragged into a web of lies and deceit, and now he is fighting to clear his name." Musk's heart raced as he listened to Jessica's closing words. It was all coming down to this. He had trusted her, and now, he could feel the tide turning in their favor. This wasn't just about winning the case, it was about exposing the corruption that had been hiding in plain sight. The judge, who had been silent throughout the defense's closing argument, finally spoke. "Thank you, Ms. Grant. Mr. Musk, you may now present your closing statement." All eyes turned to Musk. He stood up slowly, his tall frame rising to his full height. For a moment, he said nothing. He simply looked out over the courtroom, his gaze sweeping over the jury, the prosecution, and the defense. This was his moment. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Musk began, his voice calm but filled with conviction, "I stand before you today not just as a defendant, but as someone who believes in truth. We've all seen how this trial has unfolded. You've seen the evidence that shows how my words were twisted and used by others to manipulate the market. You've seen how powerful financial institutions have orchestrated this chaos for their own gain, using me as a pawn in a game I never asked to play." He paused, taking a breath. "I am not perfect. I've made mistakes, and I take responsibility for them. But I did not cause the damage that has been laid at my feet. The real culprits are the ones who saw an opportunity to exploit the system, and they've used me, and countless others, to enrich themselves." Musk's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "What I ask of you, ladies and gentlemen, is this: don't let this trial be about tearing someone down for the benefit of the powerful few. Let it be about justice. Let it be about truth. And let it be about holding the right people accountable for the harm that has been done." The courtroom was silent after his words. The jury sat motionless, their faces unreadable. It was clear that Musk had delivered the closing argument of his life. He had laid everything on the line, and now it was up to the jury to decide. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed into the room. The tension was so thick it seemed to hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. The last few days had been an emotional roller coaster, filled with revelations, twists, and unexpected turns. And now, after everything had been said, it all came down to this, the jury's verdict. Elon Musk sat in his seat, his hands resting on the table in front of him. His face was calm, but inside, his thoughts were racing. The closing arguments had been made. The evidence had been presented. His lawyers had done everything they could. The truth was out there for everyone to see. But now, it was in the hands of 12 people who would determine whether he would walk free or face the consequences of a trial that had never felt so deeply unjust. Beside him, Jessica Grant's expression was guarded. She had fought tirelessly for this moment. She had stood in front of the jury and the court, putting forth a compelling case that exposed the conspiracy against Musk. But even she knew that in the end, the decision was beyond their control. The jury had been the silent observer throughout the entire process, absorbing the evidence and weighing the arguments. Now, their decision was the only thing that mattered. The judge cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson stood, her hand shaking slightly as she held up a piece of paper. "We have, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty on all charges." The words echoed in Musk's ears, and for a moment, it felt like the world had frozen. The room seemed to tilt, and a rush of relief washed over him. Not guilty. After everything, after the accusations, the courtroom battles, the personal toll, it was over. He had won. Musk's mind raced as the weight of the verdict settled in. He glanced at Jessica, who was already smiling, her eyes full of pride. But it wasn't just a smile of relief. It was the smile of a lawyer who had done her job, who had uncovered the truth, and who had fought against the odds to ensure that justice prevailed. In the gallery, his supporters erupted into applause, the sound of their cheers filling the room. Friends, colleagues, and even a few former adversaries stood to applaud him. Musk had been through the fire, and now, he had emerged unscathed. But even as the courtroom buzzed with the sound of victory, Musk couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. Yes, he had won, but the battle was far from over. The trial had revealed just how deep the corruption ran, and it wasn't something that could be swept under the rug. His fight for truth had only just begun. The judge banged his gavel, silencing the room. The jury's verdict is final. Elon Musk is hereby acquitted of all charges. Court is adjourned. As the courtroom emptied out, Musk found himself standing alone for a brief moment, surrounded by the buzz of activity. The reporters were already closing in, eager for his statement. Jessica was by his side in an instant, her arm gently brushing his as they made their way toward the door. "Congratulations," she said quietly, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "You did it." Musk nodded, but there was no elation in his eyes. "It's over for me, but it's not over for the system. This trial was just one battle. The real fight is against the powers that tried to destroy me." Jessica gave him a knowing look. "You're right. But today was a victory. You've exposed the truth. And that matters. Don't forget that." As they walked through the halls of the courthouse, Musk was surrounded by the usual chaos, reporters clamoring for a statement, cameras flashing, and a sea of people trying to get close to him. But despite the noise, he felt strangely detached. He had been in the spotlight before, but this moment felt different. He had been tested in ways he never anticipated, and though he had emerged victorious, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. When they reached the front steps of the courthouse, Musk turned to the crowd. The cameras were focused on him, the eyes of the world watching. He could hear the questions being shouted at him, but he remained quiet for a moment, collecting his thoughts. Finally, he spoke, his voice clear and steady. "I want to thank everyone who supported me throughout this trial. This victory isn't just mine. It's for everyone who believes in truth and justice. I've said this before, the truth is the most powerful weapon we have. And no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't suppress it. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. But this trial was never just about me. It was about exposing the forces that work behind the scenes, manipulating the system for their own benefit. We've seen how deep the corruption runs, how the powerful will go to any lengths to control the narrative. But we've also seen the power of truth. And that's what I stand for. Musk's words hung in the air as the crowd erupted into applause once again. The reporters, their pens and microphones ready, flooded him with questions, but he knew this moment was not just for the press. It was for the people who had supported him, for those who believed in the fight for justice. As Musk walked away from the courthouse steps, his mind was already moving forward. He had won this battle, but he was under no illusion that the war was over. There were still those in power who would stop at nothing to undermine him. But now, with his reputation intact and his name cleared, he was ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the trial was nothing short of chaotic. Although Elon Musk had been acquitted and had every reason to feel victorious, he couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over yet. Victory in the courtroom didn't necessarily mean peace in the real world. For Musk, this was just the beginning of something bigger. After the trial, Musk and Jessica found themselves bombarded with media coverage. News outlets, blogs, and social media were awash with the details of the case. While many praised Musk for his resilience and for revealing the truth, there was also a significant portion of the media that spun the events to suggest that Musk had somehow outwitted the justice system. The narrative was messy, and the public's opinion was split. To some, Musk was a hero. To others, he was a mastermind who played the system. "I thought we were done with this circus," Musk muttered as he paced around his office at SpaceX headquarters a few days after the verdict. He sat at his desk, his fingers tapping on the smooth surface, but his mind was far away. Jessica, who had been reviewing the media reports, paused and looked at him. "We both know this isn't just about you, Elon. This case revealed something much deeper, something systemic. The people who tried to take you down, they won't stop now." Musk turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "You're right. The more I think about it, the more I realize how big this thing really is. Argon Capital, whoever's behind it, they won't let this go. We've just uncovered the surface." Jessica nodded. "The fact that they were willing to go this far to take you down means they have a lot to lose. These are not people who like to be exposed." They were interrupted by a knock on the door. Musk didn't need to say a word for the assistant to enter. A young man in a suit stepped into the room, holding a folder in his hand. "Mr. Musk," the assistant said, "there's something you need to see." Musk stood up immediately, his instincts kicking in. He walked over to the assistant, who handed him the folder without a word. As he opened it, his eyes scanned the contents. It was a series of encrypted messages, some dating back months, others just days before the trial. The sender? Someone with direct connections to Argon Capital. But the real shock came when Musk read the subject line, "Internal Communications, Plan for Aftermath of Trial." Musk felt his heart drop. This was the confirmation he had been waiting for. The people behind the conspiracy weren't just hoping for a conviction, they had already been planning their next steps, their retaliation. And it wasn't just about winning the case, it was about taking Musk down completely. "These aren't just threats, are they?" Jessica said, standing beside him as she read over his shoulder. "No," Musk replied slowly, his voice cold with realization. "This is a blueprint. A strategy. They've been planning how to discredit me even if I won. And now that the trial's over, they know how to attack." The documents revealed a detailed plan to undermine Musk's credibility further. It wasn't just about finance anymore, it was personal. They were targeting his companies, SpaceX and Tesla, hoping to engineer a public relations disaster. They knew that public opinion could be swayed, and they were ready to use any means necessary to manipulate the narrative. This was no longer a legal battle, this was a war for control of the media, for Musk's image, and ultimately, for his empire. Musk clenched his fists. They can't let it go. They won't. I've been their scapegoat, but now I'm a threat. They're going to try to destroy everything I've built. Jessica placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice firm. Then we need to get ahead of them. We have the truth on our side, but we need to control the narrative. We can't let them dictate the story. Musk nodded. He wasn't going to let them win. He had faced bigger obstacles before, but this was different. The people behind this conspiracy weren't just powerful, they were ruthless. They had already proven that they would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. We need to go on the offensive, Musk said, his voice steady. We need to expose them for who they really are before they can do it to us. Jessica smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. I'll start making the calls. We need a strategy, and we need it fast. As she left to begin working on the next phase of their plan, Musk sat back down at his desk. He had won the legal battle, but he knew that the real fight was just beginning. The war with Argon Capital wasn't over. It was far from it. Musk found himself in a high-stakes meeting with his top executives at Tesla. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew what was at stake. The board members were nervous, aware that the court victory had not removed the threats from outside. They were worried about the company's future and the stability of their stock, which had already begun to fluctuate wildly in the wake of the trial's media frenzy. All right, let's lay it out, Musk began, leaning forward, his fingers laced together. We're not just fighting legal battles anymore. We're fighting a full-on information war. Argon Capital is trying to dismantle everything we've built, and we need to be proactive. We've got the public on our side, but they'll use everything at their disposal to turn the tide. One of his senior engineers, a trusted ally, spoke up. What can we do to fight back? I mean, they've got money, media influence, and the ability to manipulate the market. How do we even begin to fight that kind of power? Musk's eyes flicked to the whiteboard behind him, where his team had outlined several potential strategies. First, we control the narrative. We need to keep the public's trust. We've built Tesla into a symbol of innovation, and we won't let that image crumble. Second, we increase transparency. People trust us because we've been open about our goals and our challenges. We need to double down on that. And third, he paused for a moment, considering the next words carefully. We make Argon Capital the story. We expose their connections, their tactics, and their motivations. The truth is our best weapon. The room was silent for a moment as everyone processed his words. Musk's plan wasn't just about fighting Argon Capital, it was about going on the offensive and exposing the puppet masters pulling the strings. Jessica was right, the truth was their weapon. And Musk was about to use it in ways they couldn't even imagine. The tension in the air was palpable. The world was watching, waiting to see how Elon Musk would respond. The media had already begun its relentless barrage of speculative headlines, many of them questioning Musk's victory in court. Was he really innocent, or had he simply outsmarted the justice system? Had he truly beaten the odds, or had his brilliance been used to manipulate the narrative? Inside Musk's headquarters, the atmosphere was charged. His team of experts, lawyers, public relations specialists, and corporate strategists, had all been called into emergency meetings, as Musk made one thing clear, the time for defense was over. It was time to take the offensive. We've spent too long playing catch-up, Musk declared during a meeting in his private conference room, his eyes fixed on the projection screen displaying a map of media coverage. The media, the public, the investors, they've all been fed a story, and now we need to rewrite it. We control the narrative now. Jessica Grant, who had become his trusted ally throughout the case, stood by his side. She had been working tirelessly, contacting key media outlets and preparing a strategy to shift public perception. We're ready, Elon, she said, a fire in her eyes. But this has to be done carefully. One wrong move, and we could be giving them ammunition. Musk nodded, understanding the stakes. We won't make any mistakes. We expose Argon Capital. We show the world who's really behind this and what their true agenda is. They wanted to ruin me. Now, it's our turn. The plan was set into motion almost immediately. Musk's team would begin digging deeper into Argon Capital's operations. They would gather every shred of evidence, every document, and every witness that could tie the organization to illegal activities or unethical behavior. At the same time, a public relations campaign would launch, portraying Musk not just as an innocent man, but as a crusader against the corrupt forces that sought to destroy him. But Musk wasn't just relying on conventional methods. He had a bigger strategy in mind, a strategy that would strike at the very heart of his enemies. The news began to break. The first headline hit the wires: exclusive investigation reveals ties between Argon Capital and global corruption networks. Musk's team had worked around the clock, connecting the dots between Argon Capital's shady dealings and its extensive network of high-powered backers. The story revealed that Argon Capital wasn't just a hedge fund, it was a key player in an international conspiracy involving multiple industries, from pharmaceuticals to arms dealing. It was a scandal that would rock the financial world to its core. The media response was immediate. Journalists scrambled to cover the breaking news. Interviews with former employees of Argon Capital, whistleblowers, and even disgruntled investors began to surface, all pointing to one thing: Argon Capital had been manipulating markets, rigging deals, and engaging in illegal practices for years. Musk's team had exposed a sprawling network of corruption that few had ever suspected. As the story gained traction, the public's perception of Musk began to shift dramatically. What had once been a simple legal battle between Musk and an overzealous prosecution was now a fight for justice against a corrupt, global system. People began to rally behind Musk, not just as a billionaire entrepreneur, but as a symbol of resistance against the powerful forces that had tried to ruin him. But even as the media frenzy escalated, Musk knew that this was only the beginning. He had dealt a significant blow to Argon Capital, but their response was inevitable. Powerful people never took kindly to being exposed. Musk wasn't naive, he knew that retaliation was coming, and it would come swiftly. One evening, as Musk was winding down in his office, he received a cryptic message on his encrypted phone. It was a simple phrase: "We know where you are." The message was followed by a series of photos, showing him from various angles, taken from a distance. It was a chilling reminder that even in the midst of his victory, his enemies were still lurking in the shadows. "Jessica, we need to be prepared," Musk said, his voice grave as he looked up from the phone. "This is only going to escalate." Jessica walked into the office, having just returned from a meeting with her team. She immediately noticed the concern in Musk's eyes. "What's happened?" Musk showed her the message. "They've got eyes on us. Argon Capital won't stop until they've neutralized us. We need to make sure we're one step ahead." Jessica's expression hardened. "We've exposed them. Now, we need to expose their next move before they make it." Musk nodded. "Exactly. We can't let them intimidate us. We take the fight to them, and we make sure they can't come back from this." Musk stood before a crowd of reporters, ready for the next phase of his strategy. He had already won the courtroom battle, and now, it was time to win the war of perception. The press conference was set to reveal a new development in his fight against Argon Capital, but it wasn't just about the facts. Musk was going to make a bold statement. He was going to show the world that he wasn't just an innocent man wrongly accused, he was a man with the power to bring down the corrupt system that sought to destroy him. "As you all know, we've uncovered something far bigger than a corporate conspiracy," Musk began, his voice calm but resolute. "Argon Capital has been using its wealth and influence to manipulate markets and destroy anyone who gets in their way. But they made a mistake. They underestimated the power of truth." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. We have evidence that Argon Capital has been involved in global corruption on a scale that's unprecedented. And this is only the beginning. We've got the information, and we're going to use it to take them down. Together, we can expose the system that allows these powerful elites to operate above the law." The room was dead silent as Musk finished his statement. The reporters, who had been skeptical of him at the start of the trial, were now leaning in, captivated by his words. For the first time, Musk wasn't just the subject of a trial, he was a force to be reckoned with. His confidence was unshakable, and the public was starting to see him in a new light. As the conference ended, the cameras flashed, and Musk was surrounded by reporters, all eager to ask their questions. But Musk didn't shy away from the attention. Instead, he embraced it. He knew that the road ahead would be tough, but he was prepared. Argon Capital might have thought they could crush him, but Musk wasn't going down without a fight. Elon Musk's bold press conference had shaken the media landscape. The world was watching as the battle between Musk and Argon Capital unfolded like a high-stakes drama. The exposure of Argon's illegal operations had sent shockwaves through the financial world, but it also raised the stakes for everyone involved. The question now was no longer whether Musk would survive, but how far he was willing to go to destroy those who had tried to ruin him. Musk stood at the edge of the precipice. He had lit a fuse, and the explosion was inevitable. Yet, in the midst of the growing chaos, he realized that he wasn't alone in this fight. His allies were stepping forward, many of them coming out of the shadows, and they all had their own reasons for wanting to see Argon Capital brought down. Jessica Grant had become one of his most trusted allies, a true partner in every sense of the word. She had been by his side through every twist and turn of the trial, working tirelessly behind the scenes to strategize and protect him from the powerful enemies he was making. Yet even she was beginning to question just how far Musk was willing to go. "Musk, you're not just taking down Argon Capital anymore. You're dismantling an entire network," Jessica said as they sat in his office late one evening. "You're exposing corruption at every level, and it's not just going to be the hedge fund that fights back. The entire system will come after you." Musk leaned back in his chair, his fingers interlaced. "I've always known that. It's bigger than just one company. It's about the people who think they can control the world without consequences. They need to be exposed. It's time to pull the rug out from under them." Jessica's expression softened, but there was still an undercurrent of concern. "I agree. But this isn't just a legal battle anymore. It's a war. And wars don't just end when the other side gets exposed, they get harder. There's going to be retaliation, and you'll need allies." Musk nodded thoughtfully. "I know. But I think we've reached the tipping point. There's no going back. The public is behind me, and that's what matters now. We need to make sure the truth keeps spreading, and we need to do it faster than they can fight back." It was at this moment that Musk realized that, despite the growing media frenzy in legal battles, his enemies were more organized than ever. The more they fought back, the more they revealed themselves. And with every layer Musk peeled back, he found that the conspiracy ran deeper than he could have ever imagined. Musk's investigation into Argon Capital was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. He had already taken down some of the smaller players, but he knew that the true masterminds were still lurking in the shadows, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. What Musk had discovered was far more than just financial crimes. It was an elaborate network of power brokers and high-ranking individuals whose influence stretched into every major industry. Musk had assembled a team of trusted experts, investigators, former government officials, and tech geniuses who could help him trace the connections that would expose the true depth of the conspiracy. As the days passed, they uncovered more damning evidence, from illegal financial transfers to shady deals with foreign governments. The depth of Argon Capital's involvement in global corruption was far worse than anyone had realized. But what Musk hadn't anticipated was the resistance from within his own ranks. His internal investigation revealed that there were people close to him, trusted people, who were connected to Argon Capital in one way or another. His PR team had been infiltrated. A few high-level executives within SpaceX had questionable ties to investors who were sympathetic to Argon's cause. Even Tesla's board had members who seemed to have a vested interest in seeing Musk's downfall. It was Jessica who first caught wind of the betrayal. "Musk, we need to talk," she said one evening, her tone unusually serious. "I've been digging, and I think we have a mole. Someone close to you is working for Argon Capital." Musk's brow furrowed. "Who? How do you know?" "I've traced a few communications that shouldn't have been happening. There's been a steady flow of information coming out of your companies. I don't know who, but it's happening." The realization hit Musk like a freight train. He had been so focused on taking down Argon Capital that he had overlooked the possibility of an insider betrayal. He needed to act fast before the mole undermined everything he had worked for. "We need to find them," Musk said, his voice low and dangerous. "We can't afford any weak links. The last thing I need is for someone to sabotage this fight from the inside." Musk began his search, quietly coordinating with Jessica to track down the source of the leak. They couldn't afford to alert anyone to what they were doing. The last thing they wanted was for the mole to go underground or, worse, to become aware that they were onto them. As they delved deeper into the investigation, they discovered a pattern. The leaks were coming from one of Musk's oldest confidants, a man named Daniel Westbrook, a senior executive at Tesla who had been with Musk from the very beginning. Daniel was a brilliant mind in the world of engineering and had helped Musk build some of the earliest models of Tesla's electric vehicles. They had been friends for years, and Musk had always trusted him implicitly. But now, that trust was being questioned. Musk and Jessica devised a plan to confront Daniel without alarming him. They knew that if Daniel was involved in this conspiracy, he was either being coerced or had some personal stake in helping Argon Capital. There had to be a reason why someone so close to Musk would betray him. The confrontation came one evening when Daniel was alone in his office at Tesla's headquarters. Musk and Jessica walked in unannounced, their faces expressionless. "Daniel," Musk said, his voice calm but with an edge. "We need to talk." Daniel looked up, startled. His face was pale, and he immediately stood up, clearly caught off guard. "Elon. What's going on?" "We know what's been happening," Jessica interjected, her voice steady. "We know you've been leaking information." Daniel's face shifted, and for a brief moment, Musk saw the panic in his eyes. But he quickly masked it with a defensive attitude. "I don't know what you're talking about." Musk took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Daniel's. "You've been working for Argon Capital, haven't you?" For a long moment, Daniel didn't say anything. Then, with a heavy sigh, he finally spoke. "I didn't have a choice, Elon. They promised me a deal, money, power. They said I could be part of something bigger. And when they found out how close I was to you, they used that against me." Musk's heart sank, but he couldn't let the betrayal weaken him. "So you betrayed everything we built. Everything we stood for." Daniel's face twisted with guilt. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't think it would go this far. But they've been blackmailing me, threatening my family." Musk felt a surge of frustration. But beneath the anger, there was understanding. "You should have come to me, Daniel. We could have worked this out. But now, you've put us all at risk." The confrontation with Daniel was only the beginning. As Musk continued his investigation, he realized that Argon Capital's reach extended much farther than anyone had imagined. The pieces were finally falling into place, but Musk knew that the battle was far from over. As the world watched, the conspiracy was beginning to unravel, but Musk and his team were just getting started. What had once been a courtroom victory had now become a fight for survival, and it was a fight Musk would not lose. The tension inside Elon Musk's camp was palpable. The discovery of Daniel Westbrook's betrayal had sent shockwaves through the inner circle, but it was also the wake-up call Musk needed. Argon Capital's infiltration had been deeper than anyone had realized, And now, Musk was faced with the daunting task of dismantling this vast network of corruption before it could destroy everything he had built. Musk sat at his desk late one night, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the surface. His mind was racing, but he had to stay focused. The battle had escalated far beyond the courtroom. Now it was personal. Argon Capital had turned his closest allies into enemies, and those who had once been on his side were now threats to his empire. He could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him, but he knew that in the face of betrayal, he had no choice but to push forward. Jessica Grant stood in the doorway, watching Musk in silence. She had been with him every step of the way, but even she was starting to feel the strain. "Elon," she said softly, "we've got a big problem. The mole is only one piece of this puzzle. Argon Capital isn't just trying to take you down, they're trying to destroy everything you've built. We need a bigger plan." Musk slowly turned in his chair to face her. His eyes were cold, calculating. "I know. And I'm not going to let them. We'll make them regret ever crossing me." Musk had always been a visionary, but this situation demanded more than just innovation. It required a level of strategy and ruthlessness that even he had never fully embraced. He knew that the legal battle was important, but the true war was in the shadows. Argon Capital's power didn't just stem from its financial reach, it was the web of connections, the hidden figures in government, tech, and media, who were pulling the strings behind the scenes. Musk had to outsmart them, and he would do it in a way that no one expected. "You're right," Musk said to Jessica. "This isn't just a matter of winning in court. It's about exposing every single person involved, from the bottom to the top. We need to go public with the entire operation, every dirty deal, every corrupt figure, every manipulation." Jessica nodded, but the hesitation in her eyes was evident. "If we do this, there's no turning back. The enemies we're making aren't just wealthy, they're powerful, and they won't go down easily. You're talking about taking on the most influential people in the world." Musk leaned forward, his expression unwavering. "That's exactly why we're doing this. We're not just going to expose Argon Capital, we're going to expose the system. It's time for the world to know the truth. They've been controlling the narrative for far too long." With that, Musk began laying out a daring, multifaceted plan. He would leak a series of explosive documents, confidential communications, and financial transactions directly linking the heads of Argon Capital to illegal activities and global corruption. But this wasn't just about dumping information into the public sphere, Musk needed to frame it in a way that the public would not only understand, but demand action. He would also engage with journalists and whistleblowers who had inside knowledge of Argon's operations. Musk had become a master at controlling the media narrative, and now, he would use his influence to expose the entire network of corruption. The world would not just see Argon Capital as a rogue company, they would see it as the linchpin of an international conspiracy. As Musk's plan came into motion, the scope of Argon Capital's corruption began to reveal itself in ways no one had anticipated. Whistleblowers from within Argon and its partner organizations came forward, each one willing to testify against the company in exchange for protection. The sheer scale of the conspiracy was staggering, and as more and more names surfaced, the gravity of the situation became undeniable. But the key to Musk's strategy was not just about throwing out information, it was about framing the story. He needed to position Argon Capital as the epicenter of an interconnected network of corruption that spanned across industries and borders. The web was wider than anyone had guessed, and each new revelation was more shocking than the last. Musk's legal team worked day and night to assemble the evidence. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that Argon Capital had been in bed with some of the most powerful figures in the world. Politicians, CEOs, foreign officials, all of them were complicit in the vast financial manipulation that had allowed Argon Capital to operate with impunity. They had used their wealth and influence to control everything from the media to the stock market, all while destroying anyone who dared stand in their way. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from a former Argon employee named Alan Foster. Foster had worked in the firm's research department and had witnessed firsthand the ways in which Argon Capital rigged market trends and manipulated public sentiment. He came forward with a trove of internal documents, detailing not only financial crimes but also blackmail and extortion schemes that had been used to silence anyone who threatened to expose them. Foster's testimony was a game-changer. It not only implicated Argon Capital but also several prominent figures who had been part of the operation. The world was finally beginning to see the true scale of the conspiracy. As the walls closed in on Argon Capital, the retaliation began. Musk had expected it, but nothing could have prepared him for the full force of the attack that was coming. The media campaign against him intensified, with smear pieces flooding news outlets. He was being painted as a paranoid genius who was simply trying to cover up his own shortcomings. They called him a rogue billionaire, a man too dangerous to let loose. The trolls and online armies hired by Argon Capital began their work, flooding social media with false claims and coordinated attacks. They spread rumors about Musk's businesses, attacked his character, and tried to discredit his every move. But Musk was prepared. This was exactly the kind of fight he had been ready for. Using his control over his own platforms, he pushed back harder than ever. He began flooding the media with facts, leveraging the very information that Argon Capital had hoped to keep hidden. Every attack from his enemies only fueled his determination. Musk knew that the more they fought back, the more they exposed their own vulnerabilities. At the same time, Musk was working behind the scenes to shore up his alliances. People who had once been silent were now coming forward, offering their support. Former rivals in the tech world, ex-investors who had been burned by Argon Capital, and even political figures who had been on the receiving end of Argon's manipulations, all of them were now aligning with Musk. His network was growing, and with it, the resistance against Argon Capital was becoming stronger. What had started as a solo fight was now a full-scale rebellion. The world watched as Musk's strategy began to unfold. Every new revelation about Argon Capital seemed to stir the pot even further. But while Musk was winning the war of perception, the real battle was still ahead. The people behind Argon Capital were not going to simply fade into the background. They would strike back, and they would do so with everything they had. Musk wasn't just preparing for a courtroom showdown. He was preparing for war, war in the media, war in politics, and war in the streets. Argon Capital had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated Musk, and now, they would pay the price. The stage was set. The pieces were in motion. And as the conspiracy unraveled, one question lingered: would Musk be able to outsmart the most powerful enemies he had ever faced, or would the forces aligned against him be too strong to overcome? The courtroom had become a battleground. Each day, the stakes grew higher, and the world watched with bated breath as Elon Musk's legal team and the top lawyers from Argon Capital squared off. But it wasn't just a legal battle, it was a fight for Musk's future, for his companies, and for the very idea that one man could take on the power structures of the world. Musk had never been one to back down, and now, with everything on the line, he was going all in. The legal strategy he had carefully crafted was reaching its peak, and he was about to make a move that would change everything. But even as he prepared to land the final blow, there was an underlying tension. Argon Capital was relentless, and they were pulling out all the stops to take him down. Elon Musk was standing in the conference room late at night, surrounded by his most trusted legal advisors, including Jessica Grant, who had been by his side through it all. There were piles of documents spread across the table, evidence, witness testimony, confidential emails, and audio recordings. Every detail had been meticulously put together, but there was still one key element missing: the final, undeniable piece that would prove Argon Capital's guilt and bring them to their knees. "Elon," Jessica said, her voice low but determined. "We have everything we need. The documents from Foster, the insider tips, the financial records, it's all here. But we need something more. Something concrete that can't be spun or denied." Musk nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. He knew what was missing. It was the last witness, someone who had been at the center of the conspiracy but had been too afraid to speak out. A high-ranking former executive from Argon Capital who knew all the dirty secrets, someone who could corroborate everything they had uncovered and bring it all crashing down. "You're right," Musk said, his voice cutting through the tension. "We need Joseph Moore. If he's willing to testify, everything changes." Joseph Moore had been a rising star within Argon Capital before he suddenly disappeared from the public eye. Rumor had it that he had been silenced, bought off, or worse, killed to prevent him from blowing the whistle on the firm's darkest operations. Musk's team had spent weeks tracking him down, using every resource at their disposal. And now, they had found him, hiding in plain sight, living under an alias in a remote location. The situation was delicate. Musk's team couldn't just walk up to Moore and expect him to comply. The man was terrified. Argon Capital had been ruthless in silencing anyone who threatened to expose them, and Moore was no exception. He had seen too much and knew too many secrets. But if he could be convinced to testify, it would be the smoking gun that would expose Argon Capital once and for all. Musk called in a trusted ally, a private investigator named Eric Turner, who had been instrumental in gathering intelligence on Argon. Turner had a reputation for being able to track down anyone, no matter how well hidden. He would be the one to find Moore and bring him into the fold. It was a week later when Turner returned with news. Moore had agreed to meet, but on his terms. The meeting would take place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, far from prying eyes. Musk knew this was his last chance. If Moore refused, the case would fall apart. The mole inside Argon Capital would remain a mystery, and all their hard work would have been for nothing. Musk and Jessica arrived at the location, their hearts pounding as they stepped out of the car. The area was deserted, the air thick with tension. As they approached the warehouse, Musk felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about winning the case anymore, it was about taking down an empire. Inside the warehouse, Moore stood waiting, his face gaunt and tired. He was a shell of the man he had once been, haunted by the memories of his time with Argon Capital. But there was something in his eyes now, a glimmer of hope, perhaps, or maybe just the desperate need to escape the shadow of the company that had consumed him. "I never thought I'd see you again, Musk," Moore said, his voice shaky. "I thought you were done for. But now, I see you're still standing. I didn't want to be a part of this anymore. I just wanted to disappear." "I understand," Musk replied, his voice steady. "But we need you, Joseph. We need you to help us bring them down. Everything they've done, everything they've hidden, it all comes to light if you testify. You're the key." Moore looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to jump out at any moment. "I know what they're capable of. I've seen it firsthand. They don't play by the rules, and they'll come after me if I speak out." Musk stepped closer, his expression unwavering. "Then they'll have to come after me too. I'm not backing down. And I'm not going to let them destroy your life any longer. You're not alone in this. We have the evidence. We have the world watching." There was a long silence. Moore's eyes darted around, clearly struggling with the decision. But then, finally, he nodded. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'll do it. I'll testify." With Moore on board, the final piece of the puzzle was in place. The case was set. The plan was in motion. Musk's legal team prepared to present the evidence, everything from the financial records to the testimonies of key witnesses, and most importantly, Moore's explosive first-hand account of the operations within Argon Capital. The day of the trial arrived, and the world was watching. News outlets had been covering the case non-stop, speculating on Musk's next move. But no one could have predicted what came next. As the trial proceeded, Musk's team dropped bombshell after bombshell. Moore took the stand and delivered a testimony that left the courtroom stunned. He described in vivid detail how Argon Capital had orchestrated illegal deals, manipulated markets, and silenced whistleblowers. His testimony was damning, and it was clear that the case was now beyond repair for Argonne. But the final twist came when Musk himself took the stand, his confidence radiating. With Moore's testimony as the catalyst, Musk laid out the full extent of Argonne's conspiracy. He presented evidence, spoke with authority, and ultimately turned the tide of the trial. In a stunning turn of events, the judge ruled in Musk's favor, ordering Argonne Capital to pay billions in damages and opening the door for criminal investigations into the company's operations. Musk walked out of the courtroom to a chorus of cheers from his supporters, the media swirling around him. He had done it, he had taken down one of the most powerful financial entities in the world. But the battle was far from over. As Musk stood there, taking in the moment, he knew this was just the beginning. There were still enemies lurking in the shadows, still powerful figures who would stop at nothing to maintain their grip on the world. But Musk had proven something today: he wasn't just a genius in technology. He was a force to be reckoned with, a man who could take on the system and win. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The world had just witnessed the rise of a new era, one where Musk had proven that no matter how powerful the enemy, he would always fight back. The courtroom had been quiet for a long time after the verdict. It was a victory, but Musk knew the fight was far from over. The headlines around the world had been dominated by the collapse of Argonne Capital, but the true consequences were just beginning to unfold. Musk's victory was a statement, but it wasn't just a personal triumph. It had set off a chain reaction that no one could predict. And Musk was now at the center of it all. As the media frenzy started to die down, Musk found himself in his office, staring out of the window. The weight of the victory hadn't fully hit him yet, but there was no denying that everything had changed. Argonne Capital, once an impenetrable fortress, had crumbled under the weight of its own corruption. The global financial landscape had been shaken to its core, and Musk had emerged victorious, but there was still a deep sense of unease in him. Jessica Grant, who had been by his side through the entire ordeal, entered the room, breaking the silence. "How do you feel?" she asked, her voice soft but knowing. Musk turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I feel like I've just woken up from a long battle. But the war's not over yet. Argonne Capital might be gone, but there are more players behind the scenes. This was just one piece of a much larger puzzle." Jessica nodded in agreement. "It's never just one thing, is it? You've made a powerful enemy in Argonne, but there's more at play here. People are going to come after you, more aggressively than before. You need to be ready." Musk exhaled deeply. "I've always been ready." The fallout from the trial had ripple effects across the global financial and political systems. Argonne Capital's web of influence had been deep, and the public exposure of its operations was nothing short of a scandal. Investors were scrambling, stocks were plummeting, and governments were in damage control mode. But the most immediate effect was the impact on the people who had been involved in the conspiracy. Top executives within Argonne Capital were arrested and charged with fraud, corruption, and conspiracy. Several key politicians who had been linked to the company faced public scrutiny, and some were forced to resign amid calls for investigation. The entire financial ecosystem that Argonne had once controlled was now in disarray, and it wasn't just the people in the company who were suffering, the ramifications were widespread. The media played a significant role in amplifying the fallout, but Musk knew the game was far from over. He had won a battle, but the war against the entrenched powers that controlled the global financial system was just beginning. As the dust settled, Musk found himself receiving an unexpected wave of support. Investors, former rivals, and even some of the very people who had once been skeptical of his methods now looked to him as a leader, someone who had proven he could take on the system and win. Musk had always been known for his revolutionary ideas, but now, more than ever, he was seen as a symbol of defiance, a man who refused to play by the rules and, in the process, had reshaped the future. One such investor, Raymond Ashford, a prominent hedge fund manager who had once been critical of Musk's approach, reached out. "Elon, I've got to hand it to you. You did what most people thought was impossible. Now's the time for us to make some changes. Let's talk about the future." Musk had been cautious about forming alliances in the past, but this time, the stakes were different. "I appreciate the offer, Raymond. But we need to be careful. This isn't about simply winning, it's about changing the system. I don't want to be just another player in the game. I want to rewrite the rules." Ashford, sensing the deeper intent behind Musk's words, nodded. "That's exactly why we need you. You've proven that one person can make a difference. We're all in this together now. It's time to disrupt the system, not just expose it." With Ashford and a growing group of like-minded individuals, Musk began to form a new alliance. These weren't just investors, they were visionaries, thinkers, and innovators who shared his drive to challenge the status quo and reshape the global economic system. But for every ally Musk gained, there were forces in the shadows who were working just as hard to bring him down. Argon Capital might have fallen, but its tentacles were still deeply embedded in the infrastructure of power. The elites who had once controlled the company were not simply going to fade into obscurity. They had vast resources, connections, and influence that could be wielded against Musk. A new enemy was emerging, a covert network of power players who had learned from the mistakes of Argon Capital. They were watching Musk closely, evaluating how best to neutralize the threat he posed. Some wanted him eliminated entirely, others wanted him silenced, his innovations controlled, his influence quelled. Jessica Grant had been monitoring the situation, keeping a close eye on potential threats to Musk's empire. "There's something happening in the background," she said one evening, her voice tense. "We've been hearing whispers, there are people who want you gone. And they're not going to stop. This is bigger than Argon Capital." Musk listened intently, his expression growing more serious. "Who are we talking about?" "We don't know all their names yet, but we're starting to uncover a network of influential figures who have interests in controlling the global financial system. They've seen what you can do, and they're not happy about it. They won't let the system be disrupted so easily." Musk's jaw clenched, and a fire lit in his eyes. "Let them come. I didn't fight this hard just to roll over." In the days that followed, Musk turned his focus to the next phase of his strategy. He had already proven that he could take on the corrupt forces in the financial sector, but now, he needed to prepare for the next wave of attacks. Musk wasn't just going to sit back and wait for his enemies to strike first. Instead, he would take the fight to them. First, he would continue to expand his alliance, bringing in more thinkers and innovators who were as committed to changing the system as he was. Together, they would create a decentralized platform for global innovation, one that could bypass the traditional financial systems and provide a more equitable future for all. Second, he would bolster his legal and political teams. The attack on Argon Capital had been just one battle, but the war was far from over. With powerful enemies lurking in the shadows, Musk knew he would need to be even more strategic in the months ahead. As the weeks passed, the world slowly started to adjust to the new reality Musk had created. The financial landscape was in upheaval, and the forces of corruption and power were on the defensive. Musk had proven that the system could be challenged, but now, the true test would be whether the world would embrace the changes he was fighting for. Musk stood at the precipice of a new era. He had exposed the corruption, fought the powerful, and emerged victorious. But the battle for the future was just beginning. And this time, it wouldn't be just Musk against the system, it would be Musk and the growing network of revolutionaries, innovators, and dreamers who were ready to build something new. The world had been watching, waiting for the fallout of Elon Musk's monumental victory over Argon Capital. But Musk knew better than anyone that a single victory, no matter how hard fought, wasn't enough to bring about real, lasting change. The financial systems were just the beginning. His mission now was bigger than himself, it was about reshaping the entire infrastructure of power, and Musk had no intention of slowing down. The weeks following the trial had been intense. Musk wasn't resting on his laurels. Instead, he threw himself into the next phase of his plan. With his allies in place, he began creating a decentralized platform for global innovation, a network that could potentially bypass the traditional financial systems and empower individuals across the world to disrupt the power structures that had long held sway over the economy. This platform was designed to be a space where ideas could be developed, funded, and brought to life without the interference of entrenched financial institutions. It was a revolution in the making, an idea that could democratize access to resources, foster innovation, and bring about a new age of entrepreneurial freedom. "We're not just creating a company," Musk explained to his team. "We're building a movement, a new way for the world to operate. This will allow anyone with a brilliant idea to fund it, develop it, and bring it to the world without the roadblocks that the current financial system creates. Imagine a world where every person has the power to shape the future." Jessica Grant, now more than ever a close advisor and confidant, looked at Musk with determination. "But the challenges will be immense. The old guard will fight back in ways we can't even predict. We need to be ready for that." "I've never been one to shy away from a challenge," Musk replied, his voice steady but full of fire. "And this isn't just about us. It's about giving power back to the people. We've seen what the system can do when it's unchecked. We've seen how it destroys lives, stifles creativity, and breeds corruption. Now, it's our turn to rewrite the rules." The success of Musk's initial victory over Argon Capital had shaken the foundations of the power structure, but it also sent shockwaves through the network of individuals and institutions that had benefited from the old system. Musk had made powerful enemies, people who had lived and thrived by maintaining control over global finance and innovation. In the shadows, they began to organize. The legal battles they had lost were only one front of the war, and now, they would take their revenge. Musk knew this was coming. As much as he wanted to focus on building the future, he couldn't ignore the reality that there were still forces working against him. It started with small, seemingly unrelated attacks, disruptive financial moves that targeted his companies, anonymous smear campaigns in the media, and efforts to undermine his allies. These were the hidden hands that Musk had anticipated. They were trying to slow him down, make him question his own power, and sap his energy with distractions. But Musk wasn't falling for it. Every move he made was met with a counterstrike, but Musk wasn't a man to be easily deterred. He had faced challenges before, challenges that seemed insurmountable, and he had come out on top. This time would be no different. Despite the attacks and the hurdles, Musk's vision began to take shape. The platform he had envisioned started to gain traction, attracting innovators, visionaries, and entrepreneurs who were eager to break free from the constraints of the current system. It wasn't just a financial revolution, it was a cultural one. People from all walks of life saw Musk as the person who could lead them to a new world, one where they didn't have to play by the old rules. As the platform grew, so did its influence. Soon, it wasn't just tech startups and financial rebels who were taking part, it was artists, educators, environmental activists, and social justice advocates. Musk had become the face of a new generation, one that wasn't willing to settle for the status quo. But even as the movement grew, there was still a sense of urgency in the air. The global elite, those who had controlled the flow of information, finance, and resources for centuries, were not going to let go of their grip so easily. They had seen the power of Musk's influence, and they were beginning to see him as a threat to the very system they had created. The more Musk's platform expanded, the more intense the pushback from the established powers became. They were using everything in their arsenal: lawsuits, media manipulation, financial sabotage, and even attempts to discredit Musk personally. But the more they tried to attack him, the stronger his resolve became. Musk had been through it all before. He knew how to weather storms, how to turn setbacks into advantages, and how to adapt when the world seemed determined to knock him down. But this time, he had something else on his side: the people. The people are with us, Jessica said one evening as she reviewed reports of the latest global protests and support movements growing in cities around the world. This isn't just about winning in court or taking down a company. This is about a revolution. We've tapped into something much bigger than ourselves. Musk nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The fight has only just begun. Months passed, and the stakes continued to rise. With Musk's platform gaining momentum, the world began to take notice. And so did the elites, who began to see Musk not just as a disruptor, but as the tip of the spear for a movement that could unravel their control. They needed to stop him before it was too late. In a final, desperate attempt to regain control, they launched a coordinated global effort to undermine Musk's platform. They attempted to enact legislation that would shut it down, launched cyber attacks on its infrastructure, and even resorted to personal attacks against Musk and his team. The pressure was intense, but Musk remained unyielding. It was the ultimate showdown, the establishment versus the new order. It wasn't just about money, power, or control. It was about the future of the world. Would the entrenched powers be able to stop the revolution before it gained unstoppable momentum? Or would Musk's vision of a new world order become a reality? The battle raged on, but in the end, it was clear that Musk's platform and the movement he had started weren't going anywhere. The people had spoken, and they had chosen change. With the support of millions around the world, the movement was unstoppable. Laws were passed that gave more freedom to innovators and creators, and the financial system began to evolve in ways that allowed for more equitable participation. The old guard, despite their attempts to regain control, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer force of the global grassroots movement that Musk had sparked. They had underestimated the power of a new generation, one that was willing to fight for a better future. Musk stood at the forefront of this new world, knowing that the fight wasn't over, but also knowing that the first major victory had been won. The revolution had begun, and it was only a matter of time before the entire system was changed forever. As he looked out at the world that was now changing, Musk couldn't help but think back to everything that had led him here, the challenges, the betrayals, the sacrifices. But through it all, he had remained true to his vision. And now, the world was his to shape. The future belongs to those who dare to dream, Musk said in his final speech at the summit. And those who dare to change the world. The revolution was just beginning, and Elon Musk had proven that no matter how impossible the odds, the future was always in the hands of the bold. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?